up in our own little room there in studio for so many shows throughout the year. So I don't know. I feel like I'm like out of the cage, and like here we are, and like I can talk loudly, and I see civilization, and like I think there's a window over there, and there's Chris Sims getting his makeup done, and I'm like, okay, this room will fill up, and later today we'll hear from the Colts brass for the first time in a long time.
I might have come into the only creature that is more psyched up about this combine than you are, Kevin Bowen. As I'm walking in today, the police have the canine units here, and there's like a lab mix with the canine gear on, and it is playtime. He's excited to go. He's chasing his tail. He's looking for treats. He is happy to be here. He might be the only creature happier than Kevin Bowen right now. So, Kevin, what do you want to see on this first Tuesday at the NFL Combine?
Well, I think James and I were talking about this a little bit last week. It's just, for me, just Chris Bauer's words continue to match what he said in early January. Obviously, the actions are going to come really 2 weeks from today. It's going to happen in a hurry. But do those words continue to be, I would argue, as emotional as they felt back in January? And I think where you look at even last year's words, James, he said some things like, I didn't give Chris or Gus Bradley enough. Well, then when actions happen, he still didn't give Gus Bradley enough. So I'm just curious if, again, the emotional 72 hours removed from a season that was very disappointing, is that still alive and well on February 25th? Because we're about to get into it, and we're about to finally, I think, get some answers to all of the words that, to me, sounded a bit different back in January.
Absolutely. One of the questions I have is, how close are you? Because when that question was asked to Shane Steichen, it was, we're very close. We're right there. We can flip this thing. And then Chris Ballard comes out 2 days later, 3 days later, and he says we're not close at all. 8-9 isn't close. Losing in the Super Bowl is close. And so, obviously, I think it was a bit more semantics than them disagreeing, but still, you like to see a unified front going into the next season. And so, to me, the Combine is usually like the unofficial start of the festivities and us kind of flipping the calendar to 2025.
So, James, let me ask you, because you got an 8-9 record, and in the NFL, there's always a couple of games that could go either way, but that works that way for everybody. But one of the things we get to see in the National Football League every year is, through the course of the playoffs, you get to see where Kansas City is, where Buffalo is, where the Ravens are. And you get a really good, clear picture of what you need to do to get to that level. How far away do you think the Indianapolis Colts are from being at that level where, let's be honest, if you want to do anything in the AFC, those are the three of the teams, and there's a few more on the fringe, that you're going to have to deal with?
I think they're far away, and the reason I say that is because the quarterback, you just don't know. When you look at this team and you look at the strengths of this team, it's not at the most important position on the field, and you still have so many questions about Anthony Richardson. Even today, me and Kevin will be over there to ask Chris Ballard and Shane Steichen, what's the plan at quarterback? What do you want to see from Anthony this offseason? Will you draft a quarterback? Who do you plan on signing in free agency? Obviously, they won't answer all these questions in detail. I would love him to do so, get a jump on things this offseason. However, there are many questions to be had, and I think it starts with the guy who's under center.
Yeah, I think the reason why I don't slam the door shut till you aren't close is because you play in the joke of the division in the AFC. Like you're the stepchild of the four divisions.
The mighty Jaguars are reloading. Well, Tennessee's right there.
I feel like I've heard that.
The Texans, they're ready to challenge for everybody 12 months ago.
For a while. And Houston's dealing with the new offensive coordinator. So it's just, that's why I don't maybe totally slam the door shut on that. But yeah, if I was, expressing team confidence per se, I don't know if there's an abundance of that. Other questions on my mind today, certainly an update on Braden Smith. I can't recall the last time we've had maybe that big of an individual player / financial question in an offseason. Honestly, you probably have to go back to quarterback a little bit with, maybe Carson Wentz or Matt Ryan. And then, just other things on my mind. Do we get any details specifically with Anthony Richardson? James, we talked yesterday. I find it a little odd they're keeping the same voices around Richardson, like offensive coordinator, quarterback's coach, all the offensive staff is the same. I thought there was a chance you might get a different voice around him. To clearly the message hasn't resonated with them in the first 2 years. The Colts clearly don't feel like that's a staff issue. They feel like that's a player issue. Yeah, I'm putting words in their mouth, but that's what their actions have indicated to me. So that would be another one. And then lastly, does Lou Anarumo bring anything different? Like, will they be scouting the defensive side of the ball differently? When they went from the Chuck Pagano era to the Matt Eberflus era, they, overhauled that defensive unit. I don't get the vibe that is the case with how they view Gus Bradley to Lou Anarumo, but Lou will be on with John coming up today at 5 o'clock. Is that something that we could see change a little bit here, personnel-wise, over the next couple weeks?
Yeah, I'm very curious to see how much Lou Anarumo's influence affects how they draft, who they target in free agency, and things like that. Because as we've seen, as I've done deep dives on his sort of method, it's always like multifaceted. So you need guys who can do multiple things, whereas, in Gus Bradley's defense, you have certain guys in certain positions, and that's what they do all day, every day. And it's like, can you just beat our best when we're doing exactly what we're going to do every single week? Whereas Lou, he kind of switches it up week to week depending on who they're facing, what quarterback. And so you need guys who can be multifaceted and kind of really high IQ, I think, as well, especially in the secondary. He's going to ask a lot of those guys. I think Kenny Moore is someone who could have a really good year under Lou, but you need, a lot more Kenny Moores or type of players on this roster. So we will see. But I think, it goes back to the quarterback, and I just wonder with that first pick in number 14, would you go defense? It's hard for me to say I would because so much is riding on can you put the right pieces around Anthony.
All right. We'll be talking about all those things, some great questions to ask and hopefully get some answers throughout the day. Also, last night I went over to the field house. Pacers playing the Denver Nuggets and Nikola Jokic, who just once again shows he and that team, they're so unselfish, James. They just worry about getting the ball in the basket. They don't seem to care who's going to take the shot. You don't see a lot of isolations unless it's a planned isolation that everybody's on the same page with. And whoever has the ball has no problem giving it up. But we saw a career high for Jokic last night, 19 assists. But everybody was throwing the ball around. They had 39 assists as a team last night. And they shot 56%. And you're just not going to beat him when they do those things.
He's one of the most unique athletes in my lifetime. I mean, the man is 284 pounds. I would argue that's the under. If I could
he looks physically miserable.
If I could be honest, and yet he palms the ball. I was, I'm watching last time. Like he palms the ball and just like stands there, just putting over Miles Turner's head, like those water polo dudes do it in the Olympics. I'm always amazed by how their ability to tread water and still pass. And here's Jokic and the variety of passes. Here's a full length one. Here's a 3/4 court one. Here's a half court. Here's a little lob. I'm like, where's he throwing some of these? He's just lobbing a few of them. Oh, here's a bounce pass. Here's a chest pass. Oh, Christian Brown. Oh, there's an easy layup. Oh, Aaron Gordon's open in the corner. He'll find him. Oh, Michael Porter here. 19 assists for a 284-pound man.
Yeah. And again, you watch him go up and down the floor, and I was just watching him for a while.
He's a freak.
Night. He looks physically uncomfortable as he gets up and down the floor.
He looks like me.
He does. And James,
after a Florida vacation.
Here's the other thing. I'll tell you who he reminds me of. I want to get your reaction to this. He's Gretzky-like in his vision. He just sees 360 degrees at all times, and he's like one step ahead of you with his thought process.
Well, here's one for you. I believe the 19 assists is the second most in an NBA game by a center, trailing Wilt Chamberlain. So that's the company that he keeps.
Pretty good company, right?
Pretty great company. And when I watch Jokic, I think of the era that I grew up watching basketball, and you have LeBron, you got Kobe, you got Steph Curry. Jokic is right there in my eyes. I know some people might say he needs more championships, but just individually as a player, there's not many more I don't think you'll see that are just more talented than that guy. And it just looks so different because, he doesn't dunk. He barely ever dunks, barely jumps, but he's so tall, physical, and also just super, super high IQ on a lot of different plays. And so it never gets old to me watching him kind of read the game before the game unfolds, if that makes sense.
I was mesmerized. Honestly, I found myself just watching him as the game moved along. I never really felt like the Pacers hit the shot that really made Michael Malone freak out or take a timeout. They maybe cut. They got a couple open looks in the fourth quarter. You never felt like they hit that shot. And I want to ask Rick Carlisle when he joins us at 8, because I'm watching Rick pregame last night, and he's getting super specific. He's like, a key for you watching the game tonight will be how well we defend Denver cutting off Nikola Jokic. And I'm like, boy, that is a super specific thing. And he's rattling off these Denver stats and how good they are when Jokic has the ball and their ability to cut. Well, lo and behold, he's got a career-high 19 assists. So I'm going to guess narrator's voice, Rick wasn't too happy with how they defended off those cuts. Every Denver starter shot over 50%. I don't think you see that very often in the NBA. So I think big picture, it's second night of a back-to-back. Denver obviously is one of the best teams in the league. They clearly were, I think, highly motivated after they had just lost to the Lakers. So that's pretty much how I sum up last night. Pacers have one more coming up tomorrow night against the Raptors. And again, we will still have Rick Carlisle coming up Tuesdays at 8.
Looking forward to that. So that will come your way, top of the hour, but in a moment. I'll ask you guys the $64,000 question for the Colts this offseason. That's next on Sports Radio 93.5 and 107.5 The Fan. James Boyd, Kevin Bowen, I'm Jeff Rickard. We are live at the NFL Combine. We're the first ones and only ones broadcasting on this side of the curtain anyway. Pro Football Talk's on the other side. Nobody else is here. I think NFL Network is at the stadium right now. But other than that, that is the big story this morning in Indianapolis as the 2025 NFL Combine is underway. Kevin, very quickly, what happens today? Yeah,
just coaches and GMs. That'll be your big thing throughout the day. It'll get started here later this morning. We'll get player prospects that'll talk on the other side of this curtain right here. Coming up starting tomorrow, 11 guys from the state of Indiana colleges, 8 from Notre Dame, 2 from Indiana, 1 from Purdue. But, yes, Chris Ballard, 4:30, Shane Steichen, 5:30. That will be the big Colts items here on this Tuesday from the Convention Center.
James Boyd, one thing you're looking for from today?
An answer about Braden Smith and what's his status going forward. We know that he has a contract situation, missed the last 5 games of the season due to a personal matter, but aside from that, you could save $17 million if you release him versus keeping him going into the next season. So if you can create $17 million in cap space and only cost you $3 million in dead money, which is basically what you have to pay him if you cut him, I mean, that's a pretty big, significant difference, and so I'm curious to see if they'll give us a definitive answer on that.
All right, Pacers lose to the Denver Nuggets 125-116 at the Fieldhouse last night. Nikola Jokic, 18 points, 9 rebounds, but 19 assists. That was a problem all night long for the Indiana Pacers. They got behind by double digits early. They never really got back into it. They weren't able to do anything, and at the end of the night, Tyrese Halliburton said just too much of the big guy.
Nikola's not a guy in our league that you would say is this elite defender, but he's one of the highest IQ guys in the league, and I thought he did a great job of, in the pick and roll, making me able to make different reads, and I thought they did a good job protecting the paint, making me able to, play outside more. But, I think that I could definitely have been better, but I think that they had a good little, a good plan there, and Nikola did a good job.
Aaron Gordon leads all scorers with 25. Tyrese Halliburton, who you heard from there, had 19 points and 9 assists, 23 from Miles Turner. Kevin, Toronto Raptors in the Fieldhouse tomorrow night.
Yeah, and they've weirdly kind of been a thorn in the side of the Pacers for how bad they've been. So we'll see if they can close out this homestand 3-1. I just thought last night defensively was the issue. I mean, again, Jokic had the ball in the string, and I get that he does that, but certainly he's played how many games, and that's a career high, so you can't ignore that. Again, as I said in the opening segment, all 5 Denver starters over 50% from the floor. You hardly ever see that. I think Christian Brown just scored another layup at the rim. So, the Pacers made it, semi-interesting, but they never got like the hit the 3 for the timeout and, boomers rappelling from the rafters to try and get the crowd into it, down 4, down 5. They got it to like 7-6, but I never felt like it was truly game pressure on Denver, which, to be expected, I think, coming off a back-to-back. 3-6, the Pacers now in second night of back-to-backs.
Pacers game day experience continues to be, sorry about that, Mark, continues to be elite in the NBA. I'm walking over to the Fieldhouse last night, and the ice rink is gone. They've got the basketball courts out with buckets on end-to-end. Yeah. Saw a bunch of kids playing, thought I'd try a 3, airballed it, said, probably not a good thing to just get off work and go try a 3.
Did they chant airball?
No, they ignored me. In fact, one little 8-year-old rebounded my ball, and that's the last I saw.
Oh, see, these are the best kids ever because me and my friends, you got to the end of it.
I would have been.
No, they would have
heard me in Carmel with how much
they just took the ball away from me, silent, didn't say anything, like, dude, this is our time right
I got
now.
you.
It was all good. But they will be back home tomorrow night against the Toronto Raptors. All right, I mentioned a moment ago, guys, $64,000 question. What do you think the plan is going to be for quarterback in the offseason? They think they have their guy. There's lots of questions. And all of a sudden, there's some pretty decent quarterbacks on the NFL market, Kevin. Do you even look at those guys?
Well, I don't know if I'd use the phrase pretty decent.
Matt Stafford?
Well, again, realistic market, I think, is probably the word that you have to throw out there.
I understand, but I'm just saying there's, Aaron Rodgers. Let me ask you this. And I think
I'd rather have that custodial worker over there than
I'm not advocating
than
this
Aaron
right
Rodgers.
now. Who gives you a better chance to win opening day, Anthony Richardson or Aaron Rodgers? And I'm not advocating for that. I'm just asking the question.
Yeah, well, I mean, Anthony Richardson did beat Aaron Rodgers. If we're going to go back to the game last season with some big fourth quarter plays.
Pull,
I no on the Rodgers front.
I set him up for that.
I know.
It's just a bleak list. I mean, James, you and I had a discussion last week.
Yes, you audibly groaned.
When you name the quarterbacks, I all of a sudden, like, noises come out of my mouth. It sounds like I'm having back pain again. It's just, and I get it. That's kind of life of the market. So there's not a great answer. Obviously, you have to do something, but I just don't know outside of really a Justin Fields. I think you mentioned James Daniel Jones even. Okay, that's a little bit of a somewhat of a youth angle, somewhat of a he has been in the league and started games.
Yeah.
Obviously, in Jones's case, he's won a playoff game, as crazy as that might sound. If you look at Jones's style, there is maybe a little bit of an ability to do some dual threat, obviously not at the Anthony Richardson level. So it's just a question that I get you have to do something, but I don't know if anyone would suffice an answer of like, oh, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But and again, that's just life in 2025. And generally, I think that's just life of the quarterback market here this offseason.
But, James, don't you think that's the one thing that keeps Chris Ballard up at night? We don't have a definitive answer on whether he's got his quarterback or not.
Absolutely. I mean, you look at the teams that he's had success with here that have made the playoffs. It was the year that he had Andrew Luck when he was healthy, and then it was 2020 when he had Phillip Rivers. So if you look at those 2 years, it's like, hey, I was a great GM. I picked Phillip Rivers. I had Andrew Luck. We were balling. And so
quarterbacks will do that, Kevin.
Exactly. When you don't have the quarterback, then we get to question everything else around it. And so, yes, you've drafted good players. You've had good players at different positions. It's just that position that continues to plague you. And, quite honestly, Colts fans are right to feel a little cynical about what could happen or what the plan is because we haven't seen it work out in a consistent fashion since Phillip Rivers walked away, since Andrew Luck walked away. And so we'll see what's next. But I think this is a huge year for Anthony Richardson because, as Kevin kind of alluded to, there is no really good plan other than to give him one more year. And to me, even if you get a guy like Justin Fields, who I think is the best free agent quarterback on the market, that still isn't like he comes without flaws. He has flaws too as well. He's limited as a passer as well. That's why he got benched in Pittsburgh. So we will see how it all breaks down. But I'm excited to, again, dig into the mind of Shane Steichen, of Chris Ballard, to see what exactly are you telling Anthony to prepare for what I believe will be the biggest year of his career so far.
Certainly.
And it kind of feels, Kev, doesn't it, like whether you want to be or not, you're all in with Anthony Richardson this year.
Yeah, no, I think James just painted the correct picture, frankly, for 2025. And there's part of me that doesn't feel like this regime deserves another quarterback chance outside of Anthony Richardson.
That's fair.
I know that's a little bit more big picture, but, yeah, I kind of view it in this is his first healthy offseason. It sounds like he has decided to make a personal change with some of the people he works with around him. Again, the Colts haven't made those changes with their offensive staff. And, it's kind of weird to think of the 2 years of C.J. Stroud and Anthony Richardson, and who's the one team that's made the offensive coordinator change? It's Houston.
Yeah, isn't that something?
That's kind of wild to me. Of like, Houston's won 2 playoff games. Stroud's had a great start to his NFL career, and yet they've made the offensive coordinator change. And yet here are the Colts saying, we're good with our offensive staff. We're not going to touch. It's just interesting how the two franchises have handled it so far.
Well, they're going to have to come up with some kind of answers because I know that the folks around here have been waiting, and nothing has ever been the same since the day that Andrew Luck retired in the fourth quarter, in the middle of the fourth quarter in a preseason game a couple of years ago, and they've been searching for answers ever since. They had a nice, I would say more than a Band-Aid. Phillip Rivers was terrific. He was a 4th down and goal away from beating the Buffalo Bills in the postseason. But since then, just nothing to write home about. And you hope that Anthony Richardson pans out. You hope that there's tremendous growth in this next offseason that he has. First one that he goes into fully healthy, right?
Correct. And I obviously today's going to dominate, Combine Talk as we're live here at the Convention Center. I do want to make sure, as I know a lot of people are commuting in on this Tuesday morning, I think all of our shows touched on this on a variety of levels yesterday. But, Jeff, I wanted to make sure we go back to the just horrific images from the IU Indy bus story from over the weekend. And Paul Casaro's team, fortunately, got off the bus in time. And I can only imagine just that scene of them running from the bus on the side of the highway and watching some of your belongings, burned, frankly. And I was texting with Paul a little bit yesterday, how can we help in any way, shape, or form? And Paul was very honest, just like, 2 things. First, I want people to come out to our game on Thursday night against Robert Morris. They play at 6:30 at the Jungle. Robert Morris, for those unfamiliar, the best team in the Horizon League. IU Indy has had a very nice season under Paul in his first year there. So that's item number 1. Come out of the Jungle, support that team. It's their second to last home game of the year. And then, Mark, if you don't mind, tweeting out this link from the show account. This is kind of their donation page on their website. Paul said to me they lost $20,000 worth of belongings. Wow. You think about
that's
college
a lot at
basketball program.
Yeah.
Like IU Indy, that is a ton. And so, if you can help in any way. Yesterday I went online. bought a T-shirt for him. I was like, you know what, a little thing I can do to try and help. So Paul listed a bunch of items. Said they lost 2 sets of uniforms, projector, clipboards, balls, stretching bands, travel bags, all game shoes, staff computers, a speaker, just a variety of items that, again, for a program like that, that's a ton.
Yeah.
So if you can, either show up to the Jungle, 6:30 on Thursday. They've got one more home game coming up on Saturday. And, Mark, if you don't mind, send out that link for us. Yeah, just I can only imagine that scene for them, and it sounded like an assistant coach was one that just said, hey, we got to get everybody off this bus ASAP. And obviously that's the most important thing, that everybody's safe, but still just a frightening experience that they had on their way back from Northern Kentucky on Sunday.
All right, coming up in a moment, we will continue our coverage live from the NFL Combine downtown Indianapolis, and a little moisture on the roads this morning too, so that was bothering me today. It was supposed to be nicer and warm today, but we will continue to talk about the Colts and what they need to do on the other side of the football next as we continue on Sports Radio 93.5 and 107.5 The Fan. true, James. KB was here, sleeping bag, waiting for security to roll in about 3:30 this morning. This is Christmas morning for you, KB.
Yeah, we're just pent up in the studio for so long, and from a content standpoint, we haven't heard from the Colts brass in over a month.
That's
I
true.
feel like we're finally on the horizon for answers. Like I think this is like the NFL spring awakening a little bit.
Come out of hibernation.
Honestly, I think the weather is like fitting for this week of like we are about to start to get some answers. How different are the Colts really going to act? How different is Chris Ballard going to be here in 2 weeks? We're about to find out.
James, what do you think is going to be different from Chris Ballard today as opposed to a month ago? I wouldn't be shocked if it's a lot of the same stuff that he said back then.
I was going to say, I don't know how much he will actually say on the record as far as how different he feels or his thought process. But I think the biggest thing we'll be looking for today is perhaps just more details on things that you said. Now we can double back and say, oh, you said you wanted more competition at quarterback. What does that exactly mean? One question I have for him is it an open competition? Like, are you bringing a guy in to say, hey, you can go win this job if Anthony doesn't handle his business this offseason? Or is it sort of a fake, race to QB1 where I think you don't pull the plug on Anthony at all until he starts his next game, and see how he plays. So I think details is what we'll try to dig into today. We'll see if he provides some. And then obviously, like I said, some of the contract stuff. Do you move on from Samson Ebukam? Do you move on from Braden Smith? Do you move on from Rodney Thomas? All these guys could save you a lot of money if you release them. And so we'll see.
Yeah. So, Kev, the reason we're all here this week, NFL Combine, you got over 300 players that come in from all over the place, although most of them are from the SEC and the Big Ten. 184 guys of the 330 or so guys are from the SEC or the Big Ten. But the Colts are sitting there at number 14. What's realistically going to happen there for them?
Well, I always feel like this is a good week to get a pulse on the draft depth. By all accounts, it's not a very good offensive skill draft at the top, which is not what we saw last year. Again, the Colts had the first defensive pick at 15 overall last year. So I think that is a huge discussion point in regards to Tyler Warren. I saw a mock draft the other day. I believe Warren was the only skill player to go in the first 18 selections. I mean, imagine in NFL history the time we've had no running back, no wideout, and just one tight end in the first 18 picks. So that, I think, falls right into where the Colts are at in tight end. If you go back to Chris Ballard's comments in January, he mentioned the middle of the field was an issue for this offense, and I don't think you would describe the middle of the field without acknowledging tight end. So that obviously is a big discussion point for me. And then, again, defensively, do you feel like you need to start turning the page a little bit on that side of the ball? Because Mark and I were talking about this yesterday. I don't think there are a lot of young, promising defenders on this defense. Maybe Latu shows that in year 2. Maybe Jalen Jones continues to ascend, but I think your best defenders are knocking on the age of 30 door more than, in their prime years. So I think that's another area that you have to explore. And again, the Lou Anarumo angle certainly plays into that. And if Tyler Warren's gone, or if you don't believe in tight end at 14, if you feel like this is a good tight end draft depth, then is that defender going to be more on the minds of the Colts there at pick 14?
What are you looking at, James?
I think one of the things Kevin kind of touched on right there as far as evaluating the 14th pick is would they trade back? I know Colts fans are like, boo, get this guy off the air. But it's a realistic possibility in my mind if you
You're going to throw you outside if you say that again.
I'm serious. If Tyler Warren isn't there at 14, if, Malachi Starks, the safety out of Georgia, isn't there at 14, do you just pick someone at 14 just to pick them? Or do you kind of move back and consolidate and try to get more picks and more swings, as Chris Ballard likes to say, in the batter's box. So we'll see, but I definitely think that that's something I'm kind of, perking my ears up at is like how aggressive will you be not only in free agency but in the draft? And is that something where you're like, no, we're going to get the best player available regardless of offense or defense, try to help our team win now?
Yeah, and I think one of the things that everybody knows is there's going to be some shuffling along the offensive line before we see opening day next year. How much do you think that gets addressed these next 6 weeks?
Yeah, I'd say potentially plural shufflings on the offensive line. I can't recall, certainly, James, in the time you've been on the beat, I'd probably even go back a little bit deeper than that to where they've had this many offensive line questions. Obviously, Ryan Kelly's a free agent, so is it time to pass the torch to Tanner Bortolini, the 4th-round pick out of Wisconsin? I would do that. Right guard, Will Fries, broke his leg early in the season. You could make the argument he's your most important in-house free agent. And then at right tackle, as we've talked about here, Braden Smith. Two questions. First off, where's he at from a personal standpoint and being away from the team for over a month to end last season? And then if indeed he wants to keep on playing, which, again, you got to answer the first question, do the Colts want to pay him the type of money that he's making? Because they did draft an offensive tackle in round 3 last year, and Matt Gonzalez, and I thought his rookie season was fine. I didn't think it was alarming. If you draft an offensive lineman in round 3, you're probably thinking at some point they could be a starter for you. Is that time now? And I think a trickle-down effect, James, when we talk about this with Anthony Richardson, how critical this season is that the route you want to take at offensive line of it's such a vital year in saving Richardson's career. I would argue potentially saving this current era of Colts. You could be doing it with 2 very new starters in Bortolini and Gonzalez, and we're just not used to the Colts going into many seasons in the Chris Ballard era, particularly as of late, with potentially 2 and 3 new offensive line starters.
Absolutely. I think when it comes to Anthony, obviously you want to keep him protected. So I think, to your point, Jeff, the offensive line is like a sneaky good need for them. And so, again, if you aren't able to bring back a guy like Will Fries, if you move on from a guy like Braden Smith, like everyone kind of assumes Will Fries will be back, but he'll have suitors. He'll have people that are interested in him. He's a good young player. So I think that could be a sneaky need for this team and something they want to address. Now, is it the sexy pick? No. I don't know anybody that ever chooses offensive linemen that often in mock drafts because it's not the fun pick to make. But the trenches is where you win games. We saw that, especially in the Super Bowl with the Eagles where they just mauled the Chiefs. And even a guy as good as Patrick Mahomes couldn't get the job done because he couldn't see. He was running for his life. And so you don't want to compound Anthony's development, or rather lack thereof so far, with a porous offensive line. And yes, he can evade sacks with the best of them. That's one thing I'll give Anthony credit for. He does not take many sacks, but again, you don't want him having to process so many different things before he even goes into trying to make the throws that we need him, or the team needs him to make, to be that franchise quarterback.
All right, Kevin, we're going to start with James' post in The Athletic this morning. 5 questions this week that the Colts need to answer. I'm going to ask you, okay? First one he says is, what does adding quote-unquote competition at quarterback really mean? Will Anthony Richardson have to win the job in 2025? We addressed it briefly a moment ago, but in more depth. How do you address it?
Well, and I would take it a step further, James. What does competition mean, period? Like, I feel like in the Ballard era, competition is mostly meant depth and not real position battles. So that, competition is a big word. It's a sexy word. Hey, we're gonna add competition. Yeah, it's culture. Well, I mean, what does that really mean? Does that just mean, hey, we've got a lot of dudes at that position, and if somebody goes down, the guy replacing him has 20 starts in the NFL or something like that? Or does it mean, no, this is A.D. Mitchell versus Alec Pierce in training camp last year, like an actual real battle? So that is a. I just think we have to define it. That's probably where I would go. And again, it's not just a quarterback. Obviously, quarterback's the most important position. But when Ballard says we need to add competition, does this look like the Commanders' offseason from last year, where they went out, and I don't think they broke the bank necessarily with headlining offseason moves, but whether it's Austin Eckler, whether it was Zach Ertz, whether it was Bobby Wagner, whether it was Jeremy Chin, they had a couple other acquisitions that they made. They just added several, probably a half dozen starters, combining both sides of the ball, and it turned out to be, a little bit more of a winning culture inserted into a franchise that is the exact opposite of that in the Commanders' history. Obviously, Jaden Daniels speaks for himself, but I guess defining competition. Not just a quarterback. That would be a question and an answer that I'm looking for.
Yeah, the reason why I zeroed in on quarterback was because, as we've talked about, nothing works without that. And so I think you're just asking Anthony. We asked him at the end of the season, are you ready for competition? He was like, hey, I've been competing my whole life, and I'll be ready for whatever decision they make. But I'm curious to see how he responds to that and what you do to make sure he does. Because in my eyes, if you draft a quarterback in the 4th or 5th round, that's not real competition.
Right, agreed.
And so you have to go out and get somebody, I believe, who has done it at least to some success in the NFL. And I know, prepare to groan, if it's Jameis Winston, if it's Justin Fields, if it's Daniel Jones, they've all had some success, and obviously a lot more than Anthony has had. And so I think he needs to feel that pressure, maybe just not having that security at his position that he felt probably before he got benched last year. So I get your point, but I think it starts with quarterback, and then you obviously trickle it down to the rest of the roster where you don't have guys like DeForest Buckner coming out and saying, oh, we got too complacent. Oh, we had a bunch of ego problems. You won't have ego problems if you lose your job. You'll just have, a hard ego or a broken ego.
Heart.
Exactly. But, you won't have, a big ego if you get humbled.
You bring up an interesting name, and then, Kevin, I wanted you to address this too. Jameis Winston is a guy that can play well in spurts, but also is used to now being in the role of backup quarterback.
Yes.
Is that a likely guy to bring in?
Yeah, I mean, I think he would be on any sort of list that you would explore. If you want to play a little bit of the psychological card, does he have any, comparable situations that he could offer Anthony Richardson? Both guys drafted in the top 5. Both guys, I think at time there's been some genuine hype around them. I don't know if you play the Florida card even with them. Is that a little bit more of a, hey, I can put my arm around you, where I don't think Joe Flacco wanted to put his arm around him, if I'm going to be totally honest with you. And do the Colts care about that? Is that something, do the Colts want similar playing style in their backup quarterback? That has never been Chris Ballard's MO. Is, obviously we saw it with Flacco, not similar style at all to Anthony Richardson. So, again, what do they kind of want in the backup? Do they want more of a, hey, we feel like this guy can actually offer, and Daniel Jones, former high pick, he played in a big market, et cetera, could he offer a little bit more of that? And again, the answer will tell us a lot more than, obviously I'm open-minded. Hopefully their words will say something. But the answer to that question, whatever it does indeed look like, then we'll start to get some answers in exactly what they want.
All right, second question. Kevin, how close are the Colts to being a contending team? 8-9 last year. They had an opportunity down the stretch and then just watched it circle the drain down the last 3-4 weeks of the season.
Yeah, the only close angle to me is the AFC South. I mean, look at the quarterbacks they've beaten over the last year plus. It's one of the sorry list of quarterbacks you'll ever see. So, I can't say that they're very close. I know that 8-9 is 8-9, but every time they played a meaningful opponent last season with a starting quarterback, they lost, and late in the year they lost significantly to those teams, and even they lost to some teams that you wouldn't qualify as that. So the AFC South is a saving grace, but they will need some wholesale changes and some significant improvement from number 5 if all of a sudden they're going to be close. And, again, how do you define that? I just think I think these teams in the AFC are going nowhere. I don't see aging quarterbacks.
AFC South, you mean, yeah.
Well, no, I mean the conference as a whole.
Yeah.
Just even get in a wild card spot. If you look at it, this year your wild card teams were what? Justin Herbert, Bo Nix, and I'm trying to think of who the third one was.
You can make the argument that those are two teams that are kind of on the rise.
Right. I mean, right? Nix and Herbert are going nowhere. So that, to me, is just a different era in the AFC.
Yeah, I think there was a little bit of a maybe weirdness when it came to the language or whatever, as far as like going nowhere. I think Jeff was like, "What do you mean going nowhere? Like, these guys are going to the playoffs." And so I see what you're saying.
Yeah,
Kevin.
they're not going anywhere anytime soon.
Yeah, exactly.
Saying,
yeah, they're going places, but they're not leaving the conference. And so just to clarify there for the listeners, but I think when it comes to looking at this conference or this division rather, you have to be able to say you beat some teams you probably weren't supposed to. And that was one of the things that we haven't really seen with Shane so far, especially this past season. They had 8 wins. All of them were by, I believe, 1 possession. And so when we talk about close, it's like, yeah, you were close to being 10-7. You were close to being 7-10. And so I think that when you don't have the answer at quarterback, your margin for error dips a ton, and then it gets compounded with some of the stuff we saw defensively. So, again, I'm excited about what we'll hear from them today and also what looks or feels different heading into next season because, we could talk all day about what they should do, what they will do, but until we see some transactions, we don't really know. And that's, I think, what you have hammered home, Kevin, especially, is that Chris Ballard, he said it himself. He hasn't earned the trust of the fan base to say, oh, we believe in you. Oh, we trust you. They should not trust you right now because we haven't seen any product that's worth trusting. And so I think that is the hard part. Like, yes, it might pain you to kind of admit that, but how does that pain kind of fuel you and drive you to do something different?
And this is interesting too, Kevin, because we ask this almost every year. And James asked this as his third question in his piece today. Is this finally the year the Colts get aggressive in free agency? And I guess, first of all, define aggressive.
So I think the way I look at it is last year, they did not go out and sign a single starter outside of like retaining their own free agents. No outside starters. Their biggest signing last year in free agency was Joe Flacco, Raekwon Davis. Like, those aren't guys that move the needle enough for a team that's trying to contend or trying to be better. And so when I say how aggressive you're going to be, are you going to be one of those teams that goes out and tries to get one of the A-list free agents that Chris Ballard has routinely avoided and said, hey, I don't want to pay, B-list guys A money. I don't want to be in that first wave. And so I'm curious to know, okay, other teams have been in that first wave. Even if they haven't been, they've still gone out and got players that can start for their team right now and help elevate them. And so I wonder if that is where he can be more aggressive.
Yeah, is it quantity or is it like the high-end quality swing?
Exactly.
Like this time last year, he reportedly is making a big offer for Danielle Hunter, who went to the Texans. If that happened, what would last year's offseason have looked like? Would Michael Pittman Jr. have been back? Would Grover Stewart have been back? Would Kenny Moore have been back? Is that the path? I mean, James, you've looked at the free agent list pretty intently. I don't know if there's that type of name, and we'll see how the franchise tags play out. There weren't, so far, there haven't been a lot of tags. The deadline here is another week. But is it that swing? Are they, baseball analogy, is he just trying to hit a home run? Or is it, no, let's hit, 5 doubles and try to bolster the roster per se that way? Again, it's like, how do you define competition? How do you define aggressiveness? Is it more the quantity of it, or is it, no, we'll take a swing or two. We're still going to retain a lot on our roster, but we feel like by taking the swing or two, maybe we've added a guy in the top 10 of our team. That, Hunter would have been that last offseason, but I don't know. I don't see that name in this year's free agent class. Now, another angle, and certainly the Combine a handful of years ago is where it really sparked, but do you dangle the 14th pick out there for a veteran player? Is that something they would entertain? If you look at it as a critical year and we're on the hot seat and we've got to get our young quarterback right, well, that's how teams would often act. They would say, 14th pick, screw it. We're not going to wait and take the chance in the draft. We're going to try and get a DeForest Buckner type of player, which, again, he was traded for the 13th pick. So that is another, obviously, behind-the-scenes topic that I'll be curious to see play out.
I would push back a little bit and say there probably are some, I don't know about A+, but there are some good players out there, some really high-level players that could come in and make an instant impact, I think. Like Shavarius Ward from the 49ers. He had an all-pro season in 2023. 2024, lost his daughter and obviously went through some tragedy there. Play kind of dipped, took some time away from the team. He says he wants to get out of California. The trauma is just too much. Is that somebody who could come and kind of have a redemptive season with the Colts? And then I look at Javon Holland out of Miami. I know he had a down year as well, but 25.
Yeah, Holland I like a lot.
High IQ, young player.
Written all over
Exactly, and he's played with a ton of, defensive coordinators that are very respected. Brian Flores is another one he's played for. I believe Vic Fangio was down there for a year or so when he was down there as well. So if you're looking for a guy that fits the Lou Anarumo mold, he's one of them. So, again, I'm not saying go out and spend money on every single big-name player, because as we've seen in years past, the teams that spend like the absolute most in free agency usually are the ones that stink the upcoming season because you don't have any players, but you want to make those calculated risks. And again, I think Colts fans want to see their front office, their brass, just get some skin in the game, because we've seen the little moves here, or we kind of are in, we kind of are not, and then it gets you 8-9, it gets you 9-8, it gets you in that middling purgatory that all fans hate, because it's like we rather just think and get the number 1 pick or make the playoffs and actually do something about it.
Yeah. Also, what does Ballard think of the top positions in this year's draft? And I think that's one of the key things to listen for today.
Well, James, he's always usually pretty honest about this.
Yeah.
This is always an answer. I went back and actually watched. We had Ballard on. We'll have Chris Ballard on tomorrow in the 8 o'clock hour. Reminder, Rick Carlisle is still going to join us here coming up in about 10 minutes. But, last year he was very honest about the wide receiver depth of the 2024 draft class, and certainly that played out. The Colts ended up taking one in round 2. So, again, that is typically an answer he will offer up. And I like not only hearing that from him, but hearing that from the other GMs around the league. And, again, that's what today's all about at the Combine, is starting about 10 a.m. You're going to hear constantly from pretty much every head coach and every GM. I want to say it's like 28 to 32 head coaches are going to talk today, specifically with the GMs. How do you view this year's draft class. Sounds like pretty defensive line heavy. I believe defensive tackle has a huge number here. I know it's not a sexy draft pick for the Colts, but Grover Stewart and DeForest Buckner are getting to that age where probably, in Ballard's eyes, certainly he would start thinking about that.
Linemen.
Yes, he loves those trenches. So that will be a topic that, again, I think we usually get a relatively honest answer from the Colts GM on.
One thing I'll say about Chris Ballard to that point, and James, you've been around for a couple years now, if you listen very closely to him this time of year, if you really pay attention, you can almost always go back after the draft and free agency and marry it to what he said in a cryptic way here at the Combine.
Yeah, he can't lie. I mean, he could, but he really doesn't lie. It's always a little bit of some tea leaves you got to read or a little bit of breadcrumbs and things like that, and then you look up and you're like, wow, he really told you the truth. If you're looking at maybe a month from now or something like that. So I'm trying to get more, veteran with these things and listen to Kevin Bowen, listen to Mike Chappell and see okay, what is that buzzword that he just said? Am I reading this the right way? And so I'm getting there, Colts fans, to hopefully give you the best information.
One of my favorite things is to have like Kevin Bowen on the right and Mike Chappell on the left, and Ballard will say something and they just kind of look at each other. Like, okay, here we go.
At least Kevin's a little more subtle because Chappell I think the way he's been.
Chapp's body language, he can't hide it at all.
Right?
Did you hear? I don't know if you guys saw this last night. Somebody sent it to me. They had that night at the I forget what the exact title was, but the night over at the Murrah, the night of the champions, or with all the Colts Super Bowl players.
Night of champions.
In attendance, Jim Nantz kind of hosting a Q&A, and someone sent me Marvin Harrison. They actually said that Marvin was one of the more outspoken, or I guess candid players up there.
Ooh.
I know. I was shocked to hear that. So Marvin's telling a story about him explaining to the Arizona GM, obviously his son is on the Arizona Cardinals, explaining to the Arizona GM yesterday about what the Colts felt like they had in that era. So what made the 2000 Colts so unique? And you all of a sudden hear this in the background. It sounded like from the upper deck. Tell that to Ballard. Some fan yells down to the guys on stage. Ruthless. Marvin Harrison, of course, can't break. He breaks a little bit. He's like, how do I follow up that? Peyton offers the, hey, can we all calm down? Like, Peyton's like hushing the crowd at the line of scrimmage.
Always a quarterback.
On a 3rd and goal at the RCA Dome. But I think that phrase would be pretty universal across Colts Nation.
All right, Fan Morning Show underway live from the Combine in downtown Indianapolis, but we're going to switch gears. It's coming up in a moment, as we do every Tuesday. Rick Carlisle, head coach of the Indiana Pacers, is going to stop by. Had a tough loss against the Nuggets last night, but really they've been playing pretty well since the turn of the year in 2025, and they, as it stands right now, would have a first-round home court advantage in the playoffs. But we'll find out what his thoughts were on the loss to the Nuggets last night and what it looks like moving forward next as we continue on Sports Radio 93.5 and 107.5 The Fan. And the Fan Morning Show, Kevin Bowen, James Boyd, Jeff Rickard. We're cobbling the whole thing together again, and we are here from the downtown convention center in Indianapolis where the 2025 NFL Combine is underway. Mentioned last night, was over at the Fieldhouse, watched the Pacers take on the Denver Nuggets. And as we do every Tuesday here on 93.5 and 107.5 The Fan, KB, it's time to welcome in the coach for the Indiana Pacers. His name is Rick Carlisle, and he joins us now on the hotline. Good morning, Coach. How you doing today?
Okay, who am I speaking to?
This is Jeff Rickard. Yes, Jeff Rickard was here before a couple years ago, but we're back now, and along with KB and James Boyd, it's good to talk to you again. And look, just a buzzsaw of an offense with that Nuggets team last night. You were talking about it after the game. What do you do with Nikola Jokic?
Well, he's a three-time MVP for a reason. It's always difficult. I mean, he's gosh. You know, after the game, I got asked a question about it, and I said he had 18 points and 19 rebounds, and I was looking at the wrong column. He had 19 assists. And so one of the things that Denver does, and we're doing very well coming into the game because they had been on I think they'd won 9 out of 10, is they get a lot of rim twos, assisted rim twos off cuts because of him. And you know, we our goal going into the game was to be able to do a good job on those. And you know, at times during the game we were okay, and then in the first and third where we really had problems, we did not, and so it was a rough night.
Rick Carlisle with us here. Pacers will round out a 4-game homestand coming up tomorrow night. It'll be the Raptors, so far 2-1 after the break. Coach, last night the turnover number was pretty high. I know it was high for Denver as well. What do you kind of attribute that to offensively, you know, minus obviously what Jokic did from an assist standpoint?
Didn't take care of the ball. You know, I think that the one good thing about the game last night, us forcing 20 turnovers, I think spoke to the fact that we were playing hard. We were pressing full court. I mean, we had Miles picking Jokic up full court when Jokic was bringing the ball up for, you know, which was about half the game. But it was just we just didn't play well enough. You know, the rebounding was a big issue. We were a big deficit there. The turnovers were about even. And we just we were unable to hit open shots, and they made a lot of them.
I think we haven't talked with you in a couple of weeks, obviously the All-Star break, and last time we talked to you was on the Tuesday that you made the starting lineup decision to move Benedict Mather into the bench and insert Aaron Nesmith. I know the sample size isn't huge because you only had a couple games before the All-Star break and now a couple games after, but I guess in the 4 to 5 games that you have seen the new look with your starters, what have been your observations with Aaron Nesmith back in the starting lineup?
It's the best move and the best decision for the team, and you know we'll constantly monitor things, and you know any and everything will be on the table in terms of what's best for the team. But you know it's pretty clear to me that is the case, and so we'll keep going. You know, lineup changes are not fun. They always get more attention than they probably should, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But in this case, there were a lot of indicators that this was the right move to make, and so the decision was made, and you know we'll keep going.
Rick, James here. I know it wasn't the outcome you wanted last night, but Tyrese, another really efficient game. What did you see, and maybe what did you like about how he broke down what Denver was trying to do to him with the 15 assists, just to 1 turnover?
Well, you know, low turnovers are one of the characteristics of his game, really, ever since he's been with us, and it's one thing that makes him a great player. And you know, unfortunately, last night it was just hard for us to get anything going consistently offensively, and he was kind of the one thing we had going. And, you know, the other unfortunate thing was that, you know, he ended up playing a very high number of minutes, in part because McConnell was not available, and et cetera, et cetera. And then we were just, you know, trying to find a lineup that could get something going in the fourth quarter, and we ended up with a group out there that hadn't played that much together, with Tyrese, Shepard, Neesmith, Pascal, and Miles. So anyway, it was a disappointing night. The crowd was great, and they were trying to lift us up, but it was tough. And now we got to regather. And Toronto tomorrow is a tough matchup for us. Our games with them are always difficult.
Speaking of Toronto, when you look ahead to that matchup, what kind of pressure do you think R.J. Barrett and Scotty Barnes can do together when it comes to just rim protection? Rim pressure and also shot creation.
Yeah, they've been a tough matchup for us. Barrett in particular has had, I think he's had 2 30-point games. Barnes is another unusual player that he handles, and he does so many things, and now he's shooting the ball better, and he rebounds, and he's a triple-double guy, and all that. And Pirtle's very good. I know Pirtle's missed some games, but he's probably going to be back soon, and quickly missed the first 2 games as well, and now he's back, and I think he had a good game last night. So we'll have our hands full. We played these guys 4 times last year. The series was a little weird. We lost both games at home and won both games on the road. You can say what you want to about their record, but they're a team that is, a full court pickup team. They go hard, and matchup-wise, they've been a problem for us.
Rick Carlisle, head coach of the Indiana Pacers, joining us on the Payless Liquors hotline here on 93.5 and 107.5 The Fan. James Boyd, Kevin Bowen, I'm Jeff Rickard. Coach, you guys are playing really well overall in this middle part of the season since the beginning of the year. How difficult is it to get your guys back in the flow again, coming out of an All-Star break? You've had a couple of games since then, but when does it get to be normal again?
We, with the All-Star break now being longer, and it's been longer for a while. I don't know exactly when this went into effect. It's been 7 or 8 years ago now. Time flies by so fast. Coming out of the break, you get 2 practice days instead of 1. And so, the 2 days afford you the opportunity to, I think, get more rhythm, get more, get your legs back under you. We had 2 very good days of practice before our game against Memphis. And you think about it, Memphis, coming out of the All-Star break is a really difficult matchup, even when you're home, because they play fast, they play physical, they spend the most time in the bonus. They rebound it, they drive it, they do all that kind of stuff, and they defend. And so, give our guys credit. They had 2 great days of practice leading up to the Memphis game, and we were ready for the smash mouth elements of that game, and played well and got the win. So, I was very pleased with how we handled that. Now we're coming off this back-to-back. I don't know when our next back-to-back is, but we've got a couple of more, I think, before the season's over. We had the really difficult one before the break where, we played New York in a national TV game at 7:30 at home, and then we, got on the plane and went to Washington, which is not an easy trip because, you go to Dulles and then you got a 45-minute ride, and, by the time you get to the hotel, it's 2:00, and Washington is a difficult team to play too because they're young and fast, and you guys remember what that game was about. We were about behind the whole game, got back to got it tied up, got to overtime, and somehow won. So anyway, we got to take advantage of good spacing when we have it, and when the stretches get difficult and dense with games, we've got to handle that well too. And in the meantime, we got to hope that T.J. McConnell is back soon and feeling 100%. We're certainly not going to bring him back unless he's right. But last night, his absence was certainly a factor as well.
Tuesdays at 8 o'clock means Rick Carlisle with us here on the Fan Morning Show. Coach, it's funny you bring up that Washington game. I think it was that game, but I had jotted down after one of your wins, some players have talked about you guys watching film at halftime and that kind of changing the script, I guess, a little bit on, a big third quarter and then ultimately winning that game. How often would you say your halftimes include watching of film? I don't know. I feel like there's a bit of a misconception maybe from us on the outside of like what an NBA halftime looks like. If you don't mind, could you kind of take us into what typically your halftimes look like?
We pull clips during the first half, and we've got a couple of we got a video coach behind the bench, and we'll pull some offensive clips. Lloyd Pierce will pull some offensive clips, and whoever has a scout, whether it's Mike Weiner or Jim Boylan, will pull some defensive stuff to look at. And, sometimes you need to look at the bad things that are happening so that you can adjust them, and other times you want to reinforce good things. And usually we try to create a balance. We want to show more of the reinforcement aspects of what we need to do rather, than just the problems. And so, we'll watch anywhere from 2 or 3 clips to, sometimes 7 or 8 clips at halftime, both home and road. And with technology now, you're able to do that. So you just you get them edited on a laptop using Sport Code, which is the platform that virtually every NBA team uses. You plug into an HDMI cord in the locker room, and boom, you're on.
I think you said to us right before the break you were off to Dallas for the All-Star break. What was the best thing on the Rick Carlisle week off, or probably more like 3 to 4 days off?
Well, Abby had an event with some of her high school friends, and it was a spectacular event at Dallas Symphony Hall, and we had a blast. So it was really cool, and I stayed over in Washington after the game and flew back to Dallas from Reagan, and then we got back. I got back home on Thursday. Donna got actually back to Dallas on Wednesday. Abby came in Thursday night, and we were there till Sunday, Monday. And so then we were back for the 2 practices leading up to the Memphis game, and boom, 3 days later, here we are. 4 days later, here we are. We're, on an off day getting ready for Toronto.
Last one for me, Rick. I know you've been living this NBA life for a long time, but how do those moments, back with your family kind of give you some perspective and kind of help you reset for that stretch run that you're going to be entering right now?
Well, James, I got to tell you, this event in Dallas was something that it was a long time in planning. It was almost a year. In the South, debutante events are a big deal, and they have them all over the South, and they're in varying degrees. And I was rolling my eyes a little bit about this one, but I got to tell you, this was a spectacular event in a place that was once again absolutely spectacular. Dallas Symphony Hall. I mean, there were probably 1,000 people there. All her high school friends were there. She had 50 friends. Her and her friend Ava, who went to Hockaday with her in Dallas, had 50 friends from UVA that came to Dallas for this event. I mean,
wow.
it was yeah. No, I can't even begin to tell you. Yeah. It was just I had to learn how to waltz. They had like 3. I had to go to 3 rehearsals in a day and a half, for this thing. And it was one of the most meticulously planned things that I have ever seen, and I've never seen her happier. And so it was a blast.
Can we get some video of the Rick Carlisle waltz in here? I mean, just for my own,
I need a TikTok.
Learning, frankly. And I went to a daddy-daughter dance a few weeks ago. I was struggling.
Well, I'll give you a little hint. You face to the right and on the dance floor, because basically you end up moving counterclockwise. It's kind of a 6-step thing. It's not a big deal, and you do all this preparation, and then you get out on the dance floor, and the dance floor is so crowded that it really, all the stuff you've learned is you use it and stuff like that, but it's kind of a mashup anyway once you get out there. But it was a blast, and the music was great, the dancing was great, the food was great. The people were awesome. So it was a lot of fun. But now back to reality.
Sounds like James at Tony East's wedding.
Right.
Hey, I was getting down, man.
Right.
I was getting down.
Coach, I see a new drill in practice for the Pacers. I don't know. Thanks for being here, Coach. We appreciate it. It's good to talk to you. I'll talk to you at a game soon, but thanks for being here.
All right. Take care, guys.
You bet. There he is, the head coach of the Indiana Pacers, Rick Carlisle, who is – one of the things I love about him, he's one of the most interesting guys in the NBA. Really is.
Yeah, he's eclectic for sure. Like,
knows how to fly a plane.
Interest.
Knows how to play the piano.
Mm-hmm.
I was talking to him a couple weeks ago. He told me at one point in his life he was a scratch golfer, and the man can waltz. So what can he not? I mean, I'm lucky to do the Macarena, or like, is the hokey pokey, does it start with the left foot in? I think it's a left foot in, right?
James, he may indeed be the most interesting man in the NBA.
Man, look, he lives. I would say he would tell you he'd give that crown to the late Bill Walton because he loved him as well. So it's fun to see Rick share that other side.
Kevin's over there trying to calculate a golf tee time in the summer over there.
I got to get out there.
Right? You got to do that. You got
with Coach Carlisle. No, he did say he hasn't been able to play as much lately, so the handicap has gone up a little bit. But I would love a little round with Coach Carlisle.
Coaching in the NBA will do that to you. It kind of takes away your free time.
I know he touched on Jokic at the start. 19 assists. I mean, it's 284 pounds, and there he is just in full control. And the passes they're awkward. They're not. No one else throws the passes on the floor that he throws. It's just like he, gets his. Hell, he waltzes his way into the lane. Next thing you know, I'm like, oh, this is going nowhere. And then boom, there's Christian Brown that somehow is freed release, and Jokic just found the perfect, again, little like float pass here. Hey, half court pass, 3/4 pass in stride. I mean, it's I know it was against the Pacers, but that was breathtaking to watch.
And James, the other thing about Jokic when you watch him too, like he shows up every night. He doesn't take a lot of. There's not a lot of load for him. And again, you watch him kind of. It looks like he's laboring up and down the floor sometimes. He's always pulling on the front of his jersey and wiping it against his face or whatever. And he doesn't smile a whole bunch. But you look down and every night he's close to a triple-double. He was 1 rebound shy again last night. But he just sees the court unlike anybody else in the game today.
Yeah, I will put him on that short list of players with incredible vision. Tyrese Halliburton's on that list as well. But to see it from a 7-footer or a guy you see play in the lane and to operate like that. I mean, you got Miles Turner picking the guy up full court. And this is one of the things where I love to talk to Rick, whether it's on the radio or just in person. He will give you that perspective of how much the game has changed because he's seen so many different versions of it.
Yeah.
Because if you ask him, he's like, we weren't doing this 30 years ago. This wasn't a thing.
And I appreciate his lack of stubbornness in saying, no, we did this Pistons-Pacers days back in 03-04. I'm still doing that now. I think he has adapted over the time, and I think there's a lot of coaches that they're just unable to survive that,
Absolutely.
frankly, in a variety of sports.
Absolutely. I remember
go ahead.
What was it, last year? Devin Booker came in at 62 at Gainbridge Fieldhouse, has the building record now. He's got the building record like 4 different places. But it was the same week where Luka had 73, Karl Anthony Towns had 62, Joel Embiid had 70. And I asked Rick, I was like, what do you think of this scoring explosion? And he was like, James, we're in a new galaxy now. Like, the game that I love, it's still great, but it's changed so much and the skill level is off the charts.
Yeah, it's fun to watch. I know last night Pacers made a couple of runs, but the problem was once they got down double digits, the Nuggets just kind of kept shooting well, Kevin, and they just traded baskets.
Yeah,
for most of
I never felt like it got really serious. Like Michael Malone, big timeout, crowd on their feet, boomers going crazy. Like I never felt like it got there. I mean, you cut it to maybe 6, maybe even 5, but didn't hit the shot that really forced Denver into, all right, not panic mode, but this is real. And the Pacers got some open threes in the fourth quarter, and a variety of guys missed them. Halliburton, Shepard, Neesmith Shepard played a ton in the fourth quarter. They really didn't go with Nembhard or Matherin too much there down the stretch. So, again, probably what you would expect, frankly. Second night of a back-to-back against the Denver team that had won 9 in a row before losing to the Lakers. And tomorrow is one that, again, on paper, Toronto you should take care of. But they have had the Pacers, I don't know if numbers too high of a praise, but they've been a difficult out for the Pacers. They're terrible, but they have been difficult even this season. They've done that. So I know Coach mentioned Jakob Poeltl. We'll see about his availability because he had a huge game against the Pacers earlier this season.
All right, and that brings us now to the morning check down to let you know exactly how it happened last night and what the details were. Pacers lose to Denver, 125-116 at the Fieldhouse last night. Nikola Jokic, 18 points, 9 rebounds, 19 assists on the game. And really, they just shot a much better percentage from the field was the difference. 56% from the field the Nuggets shot last night. Tyrese Halliburton had a night of his own. He had 15 assists compared to only 1 turnover, but still as a team, they were giving the ball up a little bit, said Tyrese Halliburton.
I mean, they're a good defensive team, a championship team. They got a lot of guys still from that championship group, and they're really connected defensively. So I don't want to take away from what they did. I think I got to watch the film to really see all of our turnovers. We had some tough ones tonight. So it's just a part of it. We've been doing a good job of taking care of the ball. So it's obviously a little bit of a step back.
Can I put Scotty to work? Last time a Pacers opponent, all 5 starters over 50% from the floor.
Ooh.
I might be nerding it out too much. I also have a Purdue trivia question.
If anybody can find out, Scotty.
Scotty, certainly. I have a Purdue-related trivia question for you two. Thank you, Mark, for that. That I want to throw your way here coming up after this. But yes, Scotty, if you can, Gordon 64. Aaron Gordon was hitting shots last night. I'm like, damn, I didn't know he could do that. Like stretch the floor that consistently.
He was feeling.
To me, I think that was just they're a little bit better when they need to be, and that's the championship level team.
Boy, he started off the game great and hit a huge corner 3 late as well.
Well, Kevin, they had Russell Westbrook coming off the bench last night.
Westbrook, DeAndre Jordan, a little bit of a throwback out there.
DeAndre Jordan's got to be 45, right?
He still can't shoot foul shots.
Yeah, there's no question about that. All right, Pacers host Toronto again on Wednesday, and they are holding on to that 4th and final home court playoff
tied
spot
with Milwaukee, right?
Tied with Milwaukee, but here come the Pistons. They've won 7 games in a row.
Yeah, the Pacers will see Milwaukee, I think, twice here coming up in March. That will obviously be huge for them. So, again, Pacers and Raptors, as Jeff mentioned, coming up tomorrow night, conclude a 4-game homestand. We're live at the Combine. James Boyd, 4:30 today and 5:30 for Chris Ballard and Shane Steichen. And that's pretty much what today is, right? All coaches and GMs.
Yeah, no players, unfortunately, for some people who might want to hear some quotes or see their favorite prospects, but just coaches. And obviously, we are all kind of champing at the bit to talk to the Colts brass and see what their plan is to help elevate this team from, like I said earlier, the mediocrity purgatory into being a relevant team. And I think it's fitting, Kevin, that they kind of had like that champions night last night where that's what the Colts have become as of late, where they're just looking in the past. Remember when we were this good? What about now? And it feels like it's getting further and further away. It's 19 years since that Super Bowl. And
we'll have Chris Ballard on the show tomorrow, I think 8 o'clock hour for the Colts GM right here live at the Convention Center.
All right, I like that. Meanwhile, got the Indiana University Hoosiers playing again on Saturday at Washington. Can they keep this kind of mid-late season?
Well, they got Penn State tomorrow.
That's right. They got Penn State tomorrow, and then they got Washington on Saturday.
Penn State tomorrow, and maybe on the other side we'll get a little bit into the college hoops again. I want to throw that Purdue angle at you, but I think with that win on Sunday, I think you're starting to see Indiana's name pop up more and more in the bracket talk. Certainly they have to take care of business down the stretch, and stringing things together they've won 2 games in a month. So, I don't want to act like all of a sudden this is going to turn into something, but on paper,
they could win these.
You look at these final 4, really, they're probably going to be favored in 3 of them, which you haven't said about them a whole lot this season.
And James, Purdue plays again Friday. They will host UCLA.
Yeah, I think it was shocking to see Braden Smith be that disrupted by Indiana, just by anyone in general, because he's been such a good point guard all year. So I think it starts with the head of the snake. Obviously, him bouncing back, having a bigger and better performance, but also can Caleb First and Trey Kaufman-Wren stay out of foul trouble? Because it seems like every game they get 1 or 2 in the first half that are kind of cheap, and you're like, what are you doing? And it costs your team. And obviously, we've talked about what Zach Edey's meant to this program, but defensively, they just don't have that rim protection that they had last year. And obviously, injuries have factored into that as well, but they're struggling right now.
All right, coming up in a moment, we'll to pick through some of the things Rick Carlisle had to say as he joined us just a moment ago here on 93.5 and 107.5 The Fan, and also live from the Convention Center, starting to get ready for a big day or two from the Colts. It's James Boyd. It's Kevin Bowen. I'm Jeff Rickard. It's The Fan Morning Show. This is Sports Radio 93.5 and 107.5 The Fan.
Boy, I think I'm driving my daughter and her cousin Ellen to dance class with this song, blaring.
You know it all, Kevin. You're there.
Mark Dykton on the ones and twos. Excellent. That's probably in the Dykton vehicle as well, right? Is that already your most Spotify played for 2025?
Between Chapel Roan, Sabrina Carpenter, Taylor Swift, yeah. We're spraying all fields in the Dykton car.
Tony East did play this at his wedding, I will say.
I love that about Tony East. Kevin Bowen, Jeff Rickard, James Boyd live here at the Convention Center. We're table one. There's 64 of these. We got table one. Does that mean that Todd Meyer, our executive producer, just applied for the credential very early on?
First of all, he's very intimidating, as you know.
He is.
Todd says things, they happen. They just take place. And secondly, look, it's a home game.
Sure.
This is it.
Right. We could sleep in our own beds last night.
There you go.
We will have Chris Ballard on with us this time tomorrow. I guess we'll just be wrapping up with Chris Ballard. He'll join us at 8 o'clock Wednesday today. Ballard at 4:30. Shane Steichen at 5:30. Just on the other side of us here in the Convention Center. John will have Lou Anarumo on at 5 o'clock today. So we'll have your coverage here coming up the next 24, 36 hours. Jeff, you brought up Todd Meyer, our executive producer. He is a diehard Purdue fan. Can I throw?
Still,
I was going to say, is he dying right now? Because it is rough.
Between the football season and the last 2.5 weeks, he's struggling right now.
Can I throw a interesting Purdue stat your guys' way?
Of course.
So Purdue right now, 4-game losing streak. If it turns to 5 in a row, UCLA on Friday, that would be the longest in over a decade for Matt Painter and the Boilers there. They right now are 20th in the AP poll, okay? That is 55 straight weeks they have been ranked in the AP poll. Third longest in college basketball. Active streak. Give me 1 and 2 on that list. Longest active streaks in the AP poll. Purdue at 55 weeks, number 3. I need number 1 and 2.
Kansas?
Kansas is out after last week.
Oh, that's right. Wow, they're done. Duke?
Duke is 5 on the list.
Wow.
Ooh.
UConn?
No.
UConn has had a rough season.
Right.
Yeah. That's
Alabama?
a great question.
Bama? No. But you're in the right conference for one of the two.
Okay, SEC. Auburn.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's not Auburn, is it? Tennessee?
The Volunteers,
Wow.
Jeff Rickard, number 2 on the list.
Well, yeah, if you give us enough guesses,
79
down the list.
76 weeks. Who's number 1, boys? And they're number 1 by a long shot. They're at 102 weeks. So 26 more than Tennessee. Tennessee 2, Purdue 3. We got Duke at 5.
I'm going to go Houston. Sleeper pick.
James Boyd.
Let's go. I'm like,
Excellent.
Like, they're pretty good.
The Fighting Sampsons.
There you go.
Maybe instead of Scotty, maybe you should find out the last time a starting 5.
I'm sure those in Bloomington love that.
I mean, look, I watch enough college basketball to know that they're good every year in the tournament.
But think about that. Like, again, you guys obviously struggle with it a little bit. I did the same thing yesterday. I mean, Houston and Tennessee, 1 and 2. I don't know if those would be the first 2 that comes to mind. Marquette, by the way, is 4.
Houston kind of makes
on that
sense,
list.
though, in that they got a coach that everybody knows and respects and has been there for a long time. Because of the conference they play in, they're almost always the favorite to win or be second in that conference. You know they're going to the tournament, and they play a tough schedule in the offseason, and they usually win their share. So when you think about it, it kind of makes sense.
Well, and to me what's impressive, too, is they've gone to the Big 12 and haven't missed a beat. I mean, I think they clinched it over the weekend. They're a team that, they rise in conference. They go from the, American? Is that what they were in? Before the Big 12, and Kelvin Sampson and company have not struggled whatsoever. So we'll see if Purdue, obviously, there are probably bigger things that Matt Painter cares about, but I would say a loss on Friday night would probably knock them out of those rankings there. So 55 straight weeks for Purdue. Again, that is 3rd longest active streak.
I know a lot of talk about, the absence of Zach Edey and then an injury early on and not having big guys in the middle. And teams, I think, over the course of time have got a lot of film on them and have discovered ways to not only defend them but to attack them as well.
Well, and James brought up a good point, just the rim protection last segment. Like, to me, and I'm in a group text, which, sounds about as horrifying. Trust me.
How many group texts are you on right now?
It is as horrifying. I'm not a big group text guy, but I got a couple with some close friends, and one of them is a very split Purdue versus Indiana contingent in there. So, I feel like at times I'm separating people in that group text. But there was some debate yesterday about Mason Gillis and losing him, him moving on to Duke in the offseason. Yeah, Purdue fans certainly know this name, but I don't know how much it registers around college basketball. Purdue lost their freshman center, Daniel Jacobson, in the first minute of the second game of the year. And for those unfamiliar with who he is, 7'4", 230, was a stud on the U.S. under-18 national team that won the gold medal this summer. And, again, it was his first collegiate game, but the dude had 13, 7, and 3 in 25 minutes. 13 points, 7 rebounds, 3 blocks in 25 minutes. I mean, you think they could use that right now? And, again, probably the 3 blocks more than anything.
Absolutely.
And just 7-4, period. And we saw this with Edey. And you see with a guy like Miles Turner, it's not just the blocks number. It's just how much do you strike fear
Hey,
in a
there.
driving guard.
You're
just
there.
exactly. You're there and you're big. So again, I think when you look, Mason Gillis, do you miss some of that leadership? Yeah, I don't want to undersell Mason Gillis, but I think Purdue really misses Daniel Jacobson as just another rim protector that was a starter. And probably would have been playing huge minutes for them.
Absolutely. I mean, when you saw Ballo come in for IU the other day, he kind of changed the tenor of the game to me. Where he
and Renew was 7 of 7.
Exactly. He was feasting down low, and you're just waiting for them to stop the bleeding. They really couldn't. And then again, on top of that, when you have, those plays where Braden Smith probably should have stayed a little bit longer on the pick and roll, or maybe you get a little too aggressive on the screen and you get a cheap one, it's like you're really up against it when you have to, you're not getting the offensive explosion or the expertise from Trey Kaufman. I believe he had his 20-point game streak snapped. When you're not getting that to kind of offset your defensive deficiencies, it compounds the problem. And so we saw a version of Purdue that we haven't seen, because that second half, man, I was like, wow, Bobby Knight is like, somewhere, cheering and throwing chairs, because that was just a beat down in the second half.
Speaking of chairs, I got Mike Woodson saying he sat in the Bobby Knight chair this past game. But when we're talking about coaches and Matt Painter, how about Matt Painter kind of coming to the defense of Mike Woodson and saying, hey, you fans better figure this out?
I agree to some of it. I didn't agree with all of it.
You can't just keep throwing everybody under the bus all the time.
Yeah, I thought Painter crossed the line a little bit there. I think, him acting like whatever, X amount of people on social media like represents the entire IU fan base, to me is just kind of it's a misrepresentation, I think, of social media, frankly. Or I should say it's a misrepresentation of the entire fan base, that you look on Twitter, and sure, there are people that definitely cross the line. Yeah, I'm not going to ignore that. But Indiana has a fan base that 98% of college basketball programs would kill for. To have that passion, that money, that care factor, frankly. Good and bad. And that's what comes with being a fan. That's the definition of fandom.
I was going to say, yeah.
So I thought it was a little bit ranty, a little bit too high-horsey from Matt Painter. There were some elements of the rant that I did agree with, but I thought it kind of crossed the line.
I think when he spoke about the social media aspect and how players deal with it now, and coaches even, there's a new element to it. And I do think, as much as we want to say, as my dad's always like, why does Twitter matter? I'm like, well, you didn't grow up in it. Seriously. And so when you grow up with social media, you can't really tell an 18-year-old, don't listen to it, don't pay attention to it. That's what you grew up knowing. And so he was right to that point. But to your point, Kevin, I think sometimes we can be a little too sensitive when it comes to fan bases displaying their displeasure. They should not have been cheering for Mike Woodson and what was going on when they were losing, 5 of 6 or whatever. So I don't expect you to support. Yes, there's support for the program, but like the people in place, that's every sport everywhere. When you don't produce, everyone's going to be like, well, maybe we need somebody different. That's just the bottom line.
Yeah, and they've got an incredibly high standard. And, obviously they haven't sniffed that over the last X amount of years. Again, I mean, IU fans don't want to hear it, but the fact that in the last, 15, 20 years, Butler, Notre Dame, and Purdue have all made deeper tournament runs than you, and some of those teams have done it more, more than just 1 year, that's alarming. That's frustrating.
Exactly.
So, yeah, the Boo Birds are going to come, but also, did you hear the second half in Assembly Hall on Sunday? When you deliver, they're going to respond in a positive way. I mentioned this earlier, and I wanted to throw this in there, just bracket-wise for IU. We'll probably start to pay attention to this more with Selection Sunday now, less than, 3 weeks away. But there is a site, and not to nerd out too much over this, but there's a site called Bracket Matrix. Basically what it does, it collects all these bracketologies from out there. Right now, they have Indiana collecting all of them as the first team out. So they have them in 38 of the 103 brackets. That would be team, I guess, 69 if you were to look at it, or I guess whatever the first at-large team
69,
is.
Good job.
That is where they would be at.
This dude, man.
I couldn't hear Mark in my ear. Did he say something?
It was great. It was great.
Mark woke up all of a sudden.
Mark's been a quiet morning so far, so it's good to hear your voice.
When I can chime in, I will. You bring up 69 somewhere, and we'll be in business.
38 of the 103 brackets. So all to say, Indiana is knocking on the door. Of course, still work to be done. And we talked about this yesterday, Mark and I talked about this yesterday. We found out this with Indiana State last year. You don't want to be team 65, 66 going into selection week or conference tournament week. You need to be team like 60 because bid stealers are out there. It's inevitable. It happens on an annual basis.
Still chaps my hide that.
You got to make sure that you're above it.
And I'm pretty sure, put a fine point on, I'm pretty sure a lot of Indiana fans aren't all that worried about what Matt Painter had to say about their program.
Well, I think they were happier with the result of the
I was
second
going to
half.
say, like,
More than
yeah,
anything.
it's nothing sweeter than beating a rival, no matter how rough it's been.
It's going to be wild to look back on the Mike Woodson era and be like, no team beat Purdue more in those 4 years than Indiana. I mean, isn't that crazy?
Are we dealing with the Chuck Pagano situation? Is he gone? Or is he
That's why I said, how messy can this be at the end?
If he got Indiana, if Indiana made a run to the Elite Eight or Final Four.
Wow, you're stretching this
Okay,
one out.
all right.
I was just thinking about getting into the tournament.
They go on a Mick Cronin UCLA run a few years back, NC State last year.
At that point, seriously,
They
all
get a
bets
break
are
or
off,
two
but-
along
All
way.
bets are off?
I mean, you got to.
Can you imagine?
You got to be realistic, though.
Now,
too.
that would be great to see how the IU fan base would react to that.
Mike says, I've had a change of heart, right? All right. Quick time out here. It is James Boyd, the man, Kevin Bowen, Mark Dykton in the studio. I'm Jeff Richter. It's the Fan Morning Show as we roll on from the Combine here in downtown Indianapolis. We will talk about that coming up next. And outside of the Colts, I have a question for you guys concerning the now much maligned by Kevin Bowen, and rightly so, AFC South. Next on Sports Radio 93.5 and 107.5 The Fan.
The Indiana Convention Center. Those will be our headquarters each of the next 4 mornings. This is the Fan Morning Show. Kevin Bowen, Jeff Rickard, and James Boyd. We will have Chris Ballard on with us coming up tomorrow at 8 a.m. And that's probably the big news item today, especially from a local standpoint. Really, things are starting to pick up pretty heavily here inside of the Convention Center. Head coaches and GMs will talk from around the league throughout today, and it will be a long wait for the Colts brass. Chris Ballard at 4:30, Shane Steichen at 5:30, and if you want to sandwich in a little listening in between that, you'll have Lou Anarumo on these very airwaves, the new defensive coordinator with John coming up at 5.
Yeah, I walked over to the field house from our building last night, and when I got in there, I saw Sean Payton.
Yeah, was he watching his? Now he's a Denver fan, I would assume,
I guess.
right?
He was talking about Jokic and everybody else last night. But
I have a feeling tomorrow night will be a heavily attended Pacer game, and I think you could see some NFL people up at Hinkle tomorrow night, 9 o'clock, to see Coach Pitino. That's a top 10 St. John's team.
He's been very vocal
against
lately.
Butler.
You see that? He's advocating for the ACC and the Big East to merge and have a super basketball conference.
So he was advocating for Chris Beard to Indiana, right?
Yeah.
That too. I also saw that he said he's not recruiting any high schoolers in this upcoming class because he wants to replace his guys with, bigger, stronger players.
He's taking the Deion approach. Deion didn't make a single off-campus visit last year in the recruiting world.
I mean, it's worked in his.
They're the 7th-ranked team in college basketball right now.
Yeah, that man can coach.
Everywhere he goes, they seem to win. Now they're always breadcrumbs along the way, but he wins basketball games,
true.
Kevin.
This is true. Maybe NIL has changed that.
Indeed.
Mark's mind is racing at this point in time.
Yeah.
We are here at the Combine as the Colts and Kevin told you, get ready to talk to the press a little bit later on today, and everybody gets together. We talked about just the Big Ten and the SEC. That's really where football is played in college these days. Well over 60% of the entire player attendance coming from those two conferences. In fact, I think I saw Texas and Georgia like 15 apiece, 15, 14 guys coming in here.
Well, I think the thought, too, is, could Ohio State set the record? Michigan set it last year, right? I think for the most colleges ever in one draft, most draft picks in one college. Could Ohio State eclipse that this year? And, of course, they still have Jeremiah Smith and Caleb Downs coming back. From a local angle, Notre Dame's got 8. Purdue's got 1, and the Purdue kid, Marcus Bowe, Jeff, you and I were texting about this last week. There are some people that think he could be the first draft pick from an Indiana college. They're thinking maybe interior would be the best kind of option for him at the offensive line level here in the NFL. Then the 2 Indiana guys, Curtis Rourke and C.J. West. C.J. West, defensive tackle, had a really good all-star campaign last month. Obviously, Curtis Rourke, we saw that news at the end of the season with the torn ACL. He will not participate here, but he will do the interviews and the medical testing. Rourke, I think, will be an interesting one, James. I know we'll have Dane Brugler on, your colleague from The Athletic, later this week. Could he kind of be Aiden O'Connell a little bit in just not going to wow you maybe with arm strength, not going to wow you necessarily from a dual threat nature. I don't know. We'll see post-ACL if it's a little better for him. But poise, accuracy, decisive, those are all traits that I think if you're building out a quarterback room, you would like to have down the depth chart.
Yeah, I think this is one of the points you alluded to. We talked about this, whether it's on radio or off radio. Do you just take a flyer on a guy who you believe kind of fits what you want in a quarterback in case, an emergency happens, or if you do want to play this guy down the line? And Curtis seemed like he has some of those skill sets, some of those traits. And obviously, I don't think anybody perhaps raised their stock as much as he did on that IU program than this past season with the run that they had, the way that he played. And pretty much all year, I know the way it ended wasn't what they had hoped against Notre Dame. However, he was pretty much mistake-free all year. He made a bunch of big-time throws, took care of the football, and led this offense and helped them become sort of that defiant program when it came to, this new age of college football and obviously the expanded college football playoff.
Don't get a lot of Canadian draft picks, but Curtis Rourke will try to be that, and will be that. I think he will hear his name called, probably on day 3 coming up. So, again, local angle, that's what you'll get here coming up over the next handful of days.
You guys see anybody locally that kind of fits into what the Colts want to do?
James, who did you throw out there in your second round of your mock draft?
Benjamin Morrison, cornerback from Notre Dame. I know he has some hip injuries. He's coming off his second hip surgery, so obviously you want to make sure the medicals are correct, and maybe a little weary because you drafted Juju Brents and he's been injury prone. Maybe you just stay away from that entirely. But I also think safety Xavier Watts from Notre Dame is another one they could consider. He's a really good player. a little bit of a late bloomer when it comes to playing the safety position, but someone who is a playmaker and I do believe could be a difference maker on day one with this team.
Morrison was a stud when healthy. And unfortunately, I got to throw in that caveat, and I hate to do that at corner because we know the injury history at corner for the Colts with some higher draft picks. So that would be my one pause there is, again, look at the Ohio State game from last year. Marvin Harrison Jr., what Morrison did in that game, he was outstanding. The Watts one, he is just and this might sound like an elementary compliment, he's just such a good football player. He is just around the ball nonstop. He was a wideout early in his career at Notre Dame. I think you see those instinctual kind of ball skills when he's playing safety. We know safety's in need. So I think both those names are good names to kind of think about in that second round. I probably would side a little bit more Watts than Morrison just because of the injury history there. So, yeah, from a local angle, that would be probably where I would look at from a Notre Dame standpoint.
You bring it up and you say it's elementary and you talk about just a football player, but I think one of the things that's important about the Combine and one of the things they get 15 minutes, a team gets 15 minutes to interview these guys. And one of the things they're really looking for here, obviously the speed, the agility, the strength, all that stuff. But, James, they want to see guys, they want to feel like a guy loves football, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that can differentiate you between being in the top half of the first round to the bottom half of the first round. It can be the difference between being a second-round pick and a third-round pick. They want to feel your passion for the game, and I don't think we talk about that enough.
Absolutely, and I think it's an interesting dynamic now, or probably more interesting than in years past because of the NIL. Mm-hmm. So it's like if you had a guy who changed schools a couple times for more money or is considering to go back to school or they kind of came out or declared late because of the money factor, does that become a conversation? Like how much do you love the game versus what the game can give you? And I think it's always twofold. I mean, obviously these guys want to take care of their families and take care of themselves, but I don't know how much is too much to kind of put into, how much you love it. Because, look, we can debate certain players that have been great players, and do they really love the game as much as, the most football-y person you know? I think it still comes down to a considerable level of talent and what that can bring out of you.
I'm not holding my breath for this, James, but in regards to Chris Ballard and his draft approach, he has been a guy that salivates over the numbers inside of Lucas Oil Stadium coming up all this week. He salivates over those numbers. He is a huge believer in the testing and the measurables of that. You bring up a name like Xavier Watts. This is my opinion. I don't think Watts will be a great tester. I don't think he'll be this eye-popping, whatever, freak track athlete out there. But I think the Colts need to look into more of the pure football players and not just the track athletes. I think they've done that too often in the Ballard era, where I get that there are some measurables and there's some numbers that if you play out the math, a guy that's this size and runs that, he turns out to be an 82% hit rate in the NFL. I think there are some times where you can look at some of those exceptions, though, and Watts, to me, could be that at safety of just a damn good football player. And, again, he might not be 6'2 and 222 and running 4'3", but he just finds the ball. And I think that side of Ballard's kind of altering his draft philosophy, I think that should be explored a little bit more.
Well, I bring that up because one of my good friends, the late, great Gil Brandt, who I worked with for a long time at NFL Radio, would tell me, yes, all that stuff's important. In fact, he's kind of the guy that said, this is what we're looking for in speed, size, wingspan, all those things. But he said, the one thing, Jeff, I like looking at film, I like looking at a guy that just got up off the bottom of the pile every play.
And that's Watts.
Yeah.
I mean, that's him. I mean, he's just always around the ball. And IU fans saw it. He had the interception of Rourke on that opening drive when Indiana had some promise there. So, when I heard Chris Ballard talk last month, James, I heard a different tone in free agency. I heard a little bit of a different tone in defensive approach. I didn't hear anything really different with the draft. Well, so far the defense has played out, and I would say, based off the coordinator change, that's been different. We'll see free agency really play out here over the next 2 weeks. Draft, though, I didn't hear a whole lot of different words. Obviously, we'll wait to hear from him later today, and he'll be on with us in 23 hours.
All right, coming up in just a moment, we'll check out one of the senior reporters at ESPN, someone who's taken over the Peter King role and raising some money.
Annual Combine event over at Sun King here coming up this weekend. Kaylin Kaler, we've had her on before. She does great work and had a great local story also. A little update on that from Robert Mathis. And that we'll chat with her coming up next right here at the Combine.
All right, James Boyd, Kevin Bowen, I'm Jeff Rickard. It's the Fan Morning Show, live from the Combine in downtown Indianapolis. And Cam, engineer Cam is here today as well. Mark Dyke Blankton is still looking through ads on X as we speak right now. But we will continue
Pray for the Google
momentarily
searches.
on Sports Radio 93.5 and 107.5 The Fan.
Like, he would. I mean, I know he wouldn't lie about it. But
We're busy talking with our brand new guest here, and we all had our headsets off. We'll blame Cam for that. The engineer always gets the blame right there. It's the Fan Morning Show, live from the Downtown Convention Center in Indianapolis. Combine is here. And Kevin Bowen, I know you've been excited about this because it's one of the great events of the Combine. It's been taken over from Peter King. But our next guest, Kaylin Kaler from ESPN, one of the senior NFL reporters there, joins us now on set here at the Convention Center. First of all, thanks so much for being here today. We got so into talking about the Colts and the NFL and everything.
Yeah.
Mark is like, you guys are back on. You guys are back on.
Well, and Kaylin just set a record. She's the first person ever to complain about the warm weather in Indiana in the month of February.
yeah, I'm too hot. Like, I'm wearing a sweater and I regret it. It's like really
Visit Indy needs to interview
warm
you.
here.
We need to get
Yeah.
you on like the Sports Corp testimonials
well,
here.
Also, I'm coming from Chicago, and I mean, I'm sure winter has been the same here as there, but it's been awful.
Sure.
Like, it's been so
This is
cold.
tropical today.
It is.
This is great.
I was in my leather jacket outside last night, and I'm like, yay.
Hey, before we start talking about the Combine, though, I think this is really cool, and I know Kevin had talked about it, and he's excited about it, too, but kind of taking over where Peter King left off with the Sun King Brewery and the fundraiser that goes on there. Explain to everybody what that's all about again and why that's important to you.
Yeah, so I should know how many years Peter had done this, but I don't off the top of my head. But he started it a while ago, and the concept was like get a bunch of reporters together to talk about the scouting combine, talk about the Colts, talk about the NFL at large. Peter hosted it. He had a bunch of insiders, NFL reporters from around the league who would come and take questions from the audience, and then the ticket proceeds would always go to a different charity. And this year our charity is the Parks Alliance of Indianapolis, which obviously builds and promotes and protects green spaces in Indianapolis and public parks, which I think is a really cool charity. And so last year when Peter retired, I took over the event for him, and so this will be the second year that I'm doing it, and we're going to have a really cool panel of insiders and reporters from around the league. I know Albert Breer of Sports Illustrated will be there, and there'll be some Colts reporters. There will be some reporters from ESPN, from The Athletic, from Yahoo. We're going to try to have a really well-rounded group, and we can talk about the draft, we can talk about the Colts, we can talk about league issues at large, and it should be a really fun night. And obviously the proceeds are going to go to charity, and then it's at Sun King Brewery, which is a really awesome local brewery. If you guys listening have not been there, you need to swing by. It's really great, and the guy who owns Sun King, Steve, he's really great, and he is a huge, Colts fan, NFL fan.
He's a big listener to the airwaves.
I think he's probably listening right now because I told him I was like, I'm going on at 9 a.m.
Kevin's no stranger to the Sun King Brewery.
No, I was going to say I've had many Weemacs in my day, so that'll be fun. Friday at 6, correct?
Yes, Friday at 6 o'clock, and you can find the tickets. I've tweeted it. If you go to my Twitter, at Kaylin Kaler, or on Blue Sky, the link is pinned there, and also you can find it on the Sun King website, I believe. It's on Eventbrite, and so, we would love to see you there. Buy your ticket. Make sure you get your spot locked in. That's
a great cause. I love that. Selfishly, as someone that obviously spends a lot of times in parks with some young kids right off College, downtown here, just east of downtown, for those unfamiliar with where Sun King is at. Nationally, Combine, what's like the big storyline for you? I feel like we might be missing this year the massive, I guess Travis Hunter will have the huge crowd. Like, what position are you going to be in the NFL? But I don't think we have the Kyler Murray baseball story. I don't think we have like the Joe Burrow, do you want to go to the Bengals story, or like Manti Te'o or Jameis Winston. It feels like we're missing that. So nationally, I guess what's the big one for you?
I agree. I think there's like a lack of a big hook in this combine and in this draft process. Last year it was Caleb Williams, and like,
sure,
does he want to play for the Bears? That's kind of what we were talking about last year at this time. This year, I don't know that there's really like a franchise quarterback necessarily in this draft. I think you guys probably have talked about that. So maybe that's even like the storyline of like, is Cam Ward the guy? Can Shedeur Sanders be the guy? And I'm kind of fascinated by both of them, even from an off-the-field perspective, because neither of those guys have hired agents, so it's kind of similar to what Caleb did last year. They don't have representation, and obviously, like, just the dynamics of Shedeur stepping into the NFL when his dad is like one of the best players to ever play the game at a different position, but still, his dad is Deion Sanders, and he's been coached by Deion Sanders for I don't know exactly how long. I'm sure he's had other coaches in his playing career, but like Deion has been his main coach. And so I'll be interested to see like what if teams say anything about like their interviews with Shedeur, if that topic comes up of like, what is it going to be like playing for someone who is not your dad, who is not a Hall of Fame cornerback, right? Like, I don't know. So I'm fascinated by Shedeur and like where is the best fit for him and how teams view him. Also, everyone's saying this class of running backs could be the best running back draft in a long time. And obviously that position is on a resurgence in the NFL.
I saw a mock draft that had like 3 in round 1. I was like, wait, what year is this?
Right. And we saw obviously the season that Saquon Barkley put together last year, which was just amazing and record-setting. And so I feel like that is going to, have some kind of impact on how teams view running backs coming into this draft. And then another little tiny thing that, like, I'm looking at this week, just because I'm fascinated with some of the smaller stuff that happens during the draft process. There are only 7 small school players in this combine invite list, which I looked at the list and I was like, that's like really not a lot. And by small school, I mean sub FCS, or FBS, sorry.
Yeah.
So FCS schools, D2, D3. There's actually no D2 or D3 players here at all. There weren't any D2 or D3 last year, which obviously makes sense because of the transfer allowance. You can transfer as many times as you want now in college football, so there's no reason anymore to stay at a smaller program unless you just are obsessed with the culture and they have a history of producing. Like there's a couple of North Dakota State players here, which obviously like that is a school that has built a reputation and a strong history of developing NFL players. So I can see why those players would want to stay. But that's something I'm asking around about because it's a trend. It's been on the decline. There used to be about a little over 20 on average small school players invited to the combine every year, and this year there's only 7, and that's like an all-time low as far back as I've looked, which is about 10 years. So that's just a tiny little tidbit. I'm like, I don't know if anyone cares about that except for me, but I'm kind of interested in like seeing if it matters and if there's any other ramifications of that.
So for those listening who don't know, I used to work with Kaylin at The Athletic, and Kaylin would always say, oh, this little thing, it's not a big deal. And she dropped this story like 3 months from now, and it's the most fascinating thing that you get out of the combine or the draft or whatever.
Here's 5,000 words, James.
Exactly. No, seriously, all the weird things that she thinks of end up being really cool stories because it's questions you don't always ask yourself. So I always admired you for that.
Thank
you.
Then
when it comes to, you were all over the Caleb Williams and the Bears angle last year and the leverage that he had at his position. Yeah. Do you think that could be a trend, when you're talking about Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders not having agents, and Shedeur Sanders, the reports came out he's not throwing, and having the NL collective behind you, having just this brand behind you, because with Shedeur, everything is like very curated for the public eye. So how do you maybe see that trend picking up a bit when it comes to those top 5, top 10 picks?
I definitely think it is, and I was actually just talking to an agent last night who represents a lot of quarterbacks, has a long history of representing quarterbacks, and he was like, everything is negotiated now, like everything, which is not necessarily – it wasn't a negative comment. It was just like, this is what's going on because these players, they negotiate, or their agents, whoever the representative is negotiating their NIL payment through the collective. That starts 3 years ago for them. These guys coming in have now been in this world for, about 3 seasons essentially. And so they're coming into the NFL with the mindset of like, well, everything here is, there's wiggle room with everything. Everything's negotiable. So last year, Caleb didn't do the medical exams here. I don't know if Cam or Shedeur have the type of leverage that he had in the sense of
that's true.
He knew he was the number 1 pick, and he knew this isn't gonna talk
to one team.
Yeah,
he was pretty unchallenged.
Yeah, he was pretty unchallenged, and so I'm not sure. I'll be interested to see if these 2 quarterbacks or another player, if anyone opts out of the medical, because I think that will be really telling and really interesting because, that is the main purpose of the combine, and so I'll be interested to see. I think if the combine and the league knew a player was coming in and not going to participate in that, I don't think they would want to be using an invite on that player to bring them here, because that is what this is for, and the ease of it is so that every team can kind of get your medical information. But I know, just from talking to people in Caleb's camp last year, they just didn't think that anyone should have that easily, that depth of information. They're like, if people want it, we'll work with them, but we're not just gonna hand out his medical information and let him be examined by all 32 teams if they want to.
Maybe 2 or 3, right?
Right. Yeah. So that will be interesting to follow if someone does that this year. I'm not sure that I don't really expect anybody to do that, because I'm not sure if, like we said, I don't know if anyone has the type of leverage that he had last year. But yeah, that'll be interesting to follow.
Let's go back to the running backs for a second, because I find that fascinating too. We had this resurgence. Saquon Barkley, Derrick Henry, a couple of other guys had huge
Jonathan
seasons
Taylor
this year. Jonathan Taylor had some tremendous games on it, obviously. Why do you think we devalued the running back position in the first place for a few years, and all of a sudden it bounced back in a hurry, didn't it?
Yeah, I think it was because, by the time they're getting to that second contract, they're older, they've got miles. But I think the players that Derrick Henry, for example, Derrick Henry and Saquon Barkley this last season, older second contract plus players who, and Derrick Henry in particular, has so many miles on him, as we talk about players as if, which I don't love. I don't love talking about players like they're like cars, right? Because they're people. But he has so many he's just played so much. He played so much in high school, through college, through the NFL. So I think if you were going to project him out, you would not think he would be producing at the level he is now and how fast he still is. Like, I saw a stat. I don't have it obviously in front of me right now, but there was something sort of comparing Derrick Henry's speed over the years, and it was like hardly different. Had fluctuated a little bit here and there, but had not declined. And I just think that sort of defies the logic of what anyone in analytics would tell you, and what, I mean, honestly, any coach would probably tell you of, usage of the running back. So I don't know, something like inherently changed.
But also Barkley coming off a big injury too.
Exactly. So that there was a risk there for sure. And that's why I think it's easy for us to make fun of the Giants for letting him go because they did it on Hard Knocks and everyone saw the decision.
Yeah.
But from a football sense,
it makes sense.
Like, that decision was very fundamentally sound and logical. Like, it's easy to forget that he was coming off an injury. I think the Giants probably knew they weren't going to be a good team this year. And that was kind of factoring into, like, how they were viewing him. And, like, honestly, I feel like they did him a favor a little bit to be like, you know what, we are going to let you go out there and test the market and see what you can get. And I think even they, inside their little meetings, were like, do we really think someone's going to offer him, like, this much money? And it turns out they did. And credit to the Eagles, because I don't know that every team would have taken the risk, because there certainly was a risk involved there.
It's a voice of Kaylin Kaler. She's got a great event coming up Friday, 6 o'clock. Luke had emailed me. Yes, indeed, this is the Sun King downtown. There's Sun King Carmel. So I know people are maybe a little bit confused by that. But, yes, this will be the downtown location. I know Mark just tweeted out a link from our show account. All proceeds going to the Parks Alliance of Indianapolis. We had you on, I'm trying to think when it was.
It's probably like September or October.
Okay, that sounds right. Late summer, and you had done a podcast, 6-episode podcast series called Spiraled, and this was a very certainly newsy story in our state, I would argue nationally, and had a Colts angle to it, and fill in any loose ends that I'm forgetting about. But just in general, you had the news of Daniel Muir, former Colt defensive lineman, his son going missing back during the summer, and his involvement in a religious group, and Robert Mathis was also mentioned throughout the podcast and in the story as well. Any updates that you can give us, or what? First off, I thought it was a very well done podcast series. I think it's a very complicated story. I think a lot goes into trying to tell that full story, and you did a wonderful job of that. But what can you tell us the latest on that?
Yeah, so I was planning to come back to Indy on March 10th because Daniel Muir and Kristen Muir, his wife, were set to have a jury trial. And I was shocked by that.
In Logansport.
Yep. Or sorry, so I was going to go back to Logansport, which is a much shorter drive, I will say. It's about an hour shorter than driving from Chicago to Indianapolis, which I always forget. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to have to leave so early. And then I'm like, no, I'm not. 31. Yeah, I'm like, it's about an hour north, so that's great. I was planning to come back March 10th to just see what was going to go on at this jury trial, because Daniel Muir is facing the lowest degree of a felony charge that you can face, and it's for battery and obstruction of justice. And his wife is facing obstruction of justice charges. And I thought for sure that they would settle by now. And this is all related to the disappearance of their oldest son, who was a teenager, and they weren't cooperating with Child Services, who had gotten a report from his grandmother, who had been taking care of him, that he had been abused and was showing like signs of abuse on his face. He had a black eye and was swollen, and she had taken pictures. Anyways, it turned out that his parents had him back and were not cooperating with Child Services to show that he was okay. And so this became a whole thing. And I actually don't know the status of the son right now. I don't know where he is staying or who he's with, because a lot of the records for children are really under safekeeping.
But he was found.
Yeah. Yes, he was found at their home. Basically, a SWAT team had to raid the home to find him, essentially, because the Muirs were not cooperating with law enforcement. So it was a very strange situation. And so now Daniel and his wife are facing charges related to that incident. And they no longer have an attorney, which I'm not sure the circumstances of if the attorney chose to leave or if they fired the attorney or what happened, but they no longer have representation at the moment. And the trial was postponed to later this summer. So I will not be coming back on March 10th to watch that. But if it does go to a trial, I will definitely be there because I'm just so curious as to like what is going to happen. I thought for sure that they would settle just to kind of be done with this and like not have to deal with the court system, because I know a lot of people in their religious group really do not like having interactions with the court system. And Kabir Bajabiamila, who's a former Packers player, he lives in Green Bay. He's part of the same religious group. He has a long history in Green Bay of sort of mucking up the court system there with a ton of filings to kind of delay all these processes and for being unruly in front of the court. He was actually tasered in court in a divorce hearing, or tased, I don't know what the correct verb is, tased, about 4 years ago. So people that are part of this religious group do have kind of a history of kind of battling law enforcement and the court system and the government as a whole. They're kind of resistant to some of that. So I will be very curious to see where this ends up. But for now, it's sort of pushed to a later date in the future.
Well, great work on that Spiral.
Thank you. Yeah.
Again, podcast series, 6 episodes. I highly encourage anyone out there that is into that type of stuff or podcasts in general to check it out. And one last reminder for Friday, 6 o'clock, Sun King downtown. What else do we need to know?
It's going to be fun, and we need you to show up to give us questions and things to talk about. We're going to have some really good information. I hope to get into a little bit of free agency, headlines, what will the Colts do in this draft.
Well, preview that real quick, because there's a lot of questions around the Colts coming off an 8-9 season and a quarterback that may or may not be their guy.
There are, yes. And I think like this third season, coming into this third season, that's sort of the season where you need to get answers from your quarterback. We've seen that with a lot of teams before. That's sort of where you got to come out of the season feeling one way or the other. Like living in Chicago, it sounds very familiar to sort of like the Justin Fields scenario, where it was like, okay, they need to know how they feel about this quarterback by the end of the year. And if the feeling is still a question, then that's your answer, essentially.
There you go.
So I do think this is sort of the make or break year, not just for Anthony Richardson, but also for Chris Ballard and Shane Steichen. I mean, I think everyone's jobs are on the line going into this season for the Colts. I think it's going to be a really interesting year. I know, James, you did a great story digging into what that culture is like and how it was sort of failing this season, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah, I was very well loved after that piece when I went to the Colts facility the next day. But now you've been there before, but in all seriousness, I think you hit it right on the head. It was a bar. If you have a question at the end of the season about Anthony, there's your answer. And I think that is the biggest thing that they want to try to get figured out when it comes to this team, because, as you know, Kaylin, nothing else matters if your quarterback isn't the guy.
Right.
Well, enjoy your next few days here in Indianapolis. Look forward to the Sun King Brewery event.
Thank
for
you.
Stopping by, as always.
See you all there.
Thank you, Kaylin.
Thanks, guys.
See ya. There she is, senior NFL reporter at ESPN, Kaylin Keller, joining us here on the Payless Liquors hotline. Speaking of
live
Sun King,
at the Convention Center. Again, 4:30 today, Chris Ballard, 5:30 Shane Steichen. We'll have Ballard on with us coming up tomorrow around 8 a.m. And Shane Steichen is on with Jake 2 o'clock. Does that sound right, on Wednesday?
I'll double check that, but that sounds right.
I think that's right. And then Lou Anarumo, Colts defense coordinator, 5 o'clock today with Johns. That's kind of a map out of the next couple of days, Colts brass with our 3 shows.
Yeah, we talk about being at the Combine and how much fun it is for geeks and nerds like us that are kind of into the NFL. And we joke about Kevin spending the night here and waiting for security to show up so we can get in this morning. But honestly, what do you think teams outside of the medicals that she talked about there? There's a lot of business that takes place over at Prime 47, and it takes place at St. Elmo's and things like that. Are the Colts going to be involved in anything like that?
I think this is definitely like the hunting ground when it comes to the NFL offseason and sort of that first initial wave where everyone's in the same spot. So
everybody gets a vibe from everybody else.
Exactly. So one of the big storylines is obviously Matthew Stafford. You have a lot of discussions between, I'm sure, agents and coaches and GMs to kind of gauge his value and back channel conversations and things like that. I think it's also when it comes to what players you're trying to keep in-house that you're interested in. Like, you don't want it all out there that you're all interested in the same few players, because that might drive the stock up of one guy. You
agents are going to make sure that happens anyway.
Exactly. But I do think that there is, seriously though, there are stories of how secretive the process is for certain teams to make sure that other teams don't know who they're interested in. It's obviously like for like the top 10, everyone's interested in those guys, right? Yeah. But some of those like day 2 or day 3 guys you really want, you don't want word getting out. So I definitely think this is, those late nights at Prime, High Velocity. There's another one over there at the JW Marriott. even now, like, if you just sit around, you'll see somebody talking to somebody, and it's not, just, insignificant conversations happening.
I know someone, I think from The Athletic, James, maybe one of your former colleagues, they wrote a piece from the Starbucks inside the JW Marriott, just describing the amount of NFL people they saw and the orders they had at Starbucks throughout that 12-hour period during that day. I thought that was a fascinating story. And yeah, I think there's so many there's so many different limbs, if you will, to the combine. Obviously, we talk about the medicals, and those are a big deal. I think back to the story with Bob Sanders, where a lot of NFL teams were very, very hesitant about the medical history of Bob Sanders. And the Colts medical team, they felt like if you gave him the proper rest that he was needed, you could get some years out of him. They obviously didn't get a ton, but they didn't red flag him like many other teams did, and the Colts reaped the benefits of that. So that's one side of it. I think the in-person interviews, I think they're 18 minutes long, formal interviews that teams can have with prospects. I want to say you're allowed 45 of them. Those are super insightful. I mean, if you're the position coach, you walk in there, you've got 5 clips up on the board, you're going to get, I think, a great idea of the football acumen of that player. And then, as James just mentioned, you have the whole other side of it, which isn't really draft related. It's more of free agency related, league related. We brought it up earlier in the show. The DeForest Buckner Colts trade really started here in talking with San Francisco's brass and realizing that possibly you could have a deal happen. So there is, I would argue there's no league event all year where more league business is done than this week here in Indianapolis, away from the draft, which I think maybe not a lot of people realize.
Absolutely, because when you're going into the draft, you're hunkered down in your own room trying to figure out who you want to pick, whereas now you're still perusing to kind of figure out what your options are. I mean, beyond just drafting players, it's like figuring out, okay, do I want to trade back? Would I trade back? And things like that. So I think a lot of verbal communication over the next few days will determine how a lot of things go later down the line.
All right, we're at the Combine, downtown Indianapolis Convention Center. We'll continue on in a moment here on the Fan Morning Show, but it is time for a morning checkdown. Gents, the Indiana Pacers lose to the Denver Nuggets 125-116 at the Fieldhouse last night. Kevin Nikola Jokic doing Nikola Jokic things last night. He's
a freak.
Only 18 points.
He's a freak.
He only had 18 points, 9 rebounds. You take that, right? The problem last night was the 19 assists, and Tyrese Halliburton says, there goes that man again.
Nikola's not a guy in our league that you would say is this elite defender, but he's one of the highest IQ guys in the league, and I thought he did a great job of in the pick and roll, making me able to make different reads, and I thought they did a good job protecting the paint, making me able to play outside more. But I think I could definitely have been better, but I think that they had a good little a good plan there, and Nikola did a good job.
727 career games for Mr. Jokic. He's never had more assists than he did last night. I don't know how to compare it. When he palms the ball, I'm just like, he's a dude playing water polo. He's like treading water. He's got the ball above everybody. I was in awe of just watching him and the variety of passes. It's like, here's a little floating pass. I'm like, there's no way that a Denver guy is going to come down to that. Sure enough, there's Christian Brown laying it in. Full court, three-quarter court, half court. It's breathtaking to watch. And I know Pacers fans obviously didn't like the result last night, but 284-pound dude with 19 assists, don't see that very often.
The other thing that he does that makes that thing so amazing, if I can piggyback on that, is because once he gets the ball, everybody around him, they don't stop. A lot of times in the NBA,
they play off him really well.
A guy gets the ball down in the post, everybody kind of watches to see what happens. You see guys crashing the basket. You see guys wheeling around to get open.
He's their point guard.
Yeah, he really is.
he's a 6'10", 7-foot point guard.
All right. Also, they will play again tomorrow night at home against the Toronto Raptors. And as far as college basketball is concerned, we got Purdue with a big week this week, Kevin.
Yeah, they got UCLA on Friday. Again, they fell to the 20th in the rankings. Talked a little bit about that earlier. Their streak of 55 straight weeks in the AP poll certainly is up for grabs on Friday night for people that care about that. Bigger, or I would say probably what you care about more, is they haven't had a 5-game losing streak in 11 years. So that'd be quite something if Purdue were to fall to UCLA on Friday. Indiana, 8:30 tomorrow. It's Kevin Kugler, LaFonso Ellis on Big Ten Network. They've got Penn State. That's just a handle your business game. It's not flashy. It won't help your resume out too much. But for a team that is right there squarely on the bubble, you can't afford to overlook anybody at this point. So, yeah, Indiana, Penn State tomorrow, 8:30. Butler, St. John's. That's number 7 ranked St. John's inside of Hinkle tomorrow night.
And, James, as far as the Combine is concerned, a couple of Colts pressers later today.
Yes, we'll be talking to Chris Ballard at 4:30, Shane Steichen at 5:30. We'll obviously have reaction to whatever they say, but there are some big questions about this team, and I think we talked about it earlier. One of the bigger ones is, what does Chris Ballard think of this draft class, and what are the strengths of this draft class, and maybe does that tell us where they'll lean with that 14th pick and other picks in the draft?
All right, coming up in a moment, outside of the Colts, and you're looking at the AFC South, but what are some of the other big storylines from the Combine this week when you don't really necessarily have a Caleb Williams like you had last year, which was the obvious #1 overall? We'll talk about it next on Sports Radio 92.5 and 93.5 and 107.5 The Fan. James Boyd, Kevin Doan, Jeff Rickard, thanks so much for joining us inside the Convention Center for the NFL Combine 2025. And Kevin, you're not alone now. After waiting for security to get here and open up the doors this morning, the place is filling up now.
Look at this. 64 tables of radio shows and teams around here.
And we're number one.
We are number one. Hang the banner right now in Lucas Oil Stadium right here. Indeed. On the other side of this curtain back here, if you're on the YouTube stream, I'm kind of showing you that curtain a little bit over there. That's where prospects will be talking starting tomorrow, and you will get a lot of head coaches and GMs, pretty much all of them around the league will speak, and the Colts will have to wait a while on that. 4:30 today for Chris Ballard, 5:30 for Shane Steichen.
Kevin, it's an old baseball term, but does it apply to the NFL? Prospects are suspects.
Ooh, yeah, okay, all right.
They got to prove themselves.
Sounds like the next Kalen Kaler
prove themselves,
documentary
really.
podcast.
I'm telling you, man.
Episode
Not
here.
that kind of suspect.
Yeah, well,
Just
I
in
don't
terms of
know.
what's your NFL
For some of
future
them, you got to do some homework
Wow.
in that realm.
That is true. That is true.
But no, that's where it all starts to be uncovered here is where NFL teams get their first real good look at guys up close and personal. We talk about that 15-minute meeting, and I know that we've heard these crazy questions that people will try to answer and play psychological games, but most of the time, the rational general managers that I've talked to over the years say, I just want to look at a guy and spend some time with him and get a sense for who he is.
Yeah, football acumen I think is a big deal. I know Chris Ballard uses the word character a lot. I know a lot of people laugh at that. I think when he means character, oftentimes he means football character. He doesn't necessarily mean, choir boys off the field or something like that. It's, do you love the game, and what sacrifices are you going to make for that? One question I want to get to, James, I don't know if we'll have time for this today, but how do you view positionally this offseason for the Colts? Veteran edition versus draft edition. What positions do you look at and say, no, that needs a draft pick? What position do you look at and say, no, that needs a veteran free agent edition? I think you can kind of go both ways on some. Some you might say they need both.
Yeah.
So I don't know, again, if we'll have time for it to round out today, but certainly here at some point this week I want to get to that.
Yeah, off the top of my head, I would probably think veteran for safety, because we looked at Lou Anarumo's defenses in Cincinnati. They thrive with veteran safeties. And then I think drafting a tight end is obvious just because there isn't a great market for tight ends in free agency. And it's a pretty good class. I know everyone's in love with Tyler Warren here in Indianapolis, as we all tend to be. Every year you get your one player you want. But this is a good tight end class, and it doesn't just start and stop with Tyler Warren. They got Colson Loveland, who's another good player.
Daniel Jeremiah has him 7th. On his board. Colson Loveland, the tight end out of Michigan, overall prospects, 7th on the board. Again,
and Tyler Warren's number 5 on his list.
We've seen Tyler Warren pretty much top 10 consensus.
Exactly.
But to see, 2 tight ends as the top 10 best players in the draft, I think some of that is a lack of other offensive skill. But to have that at tight end is pretty unique. So I think that'll be a heavy debate for teams of, do you rely on the depth of the tight end, or do you say, hey, it's such a premium group at the top, you should tap into that?
Well, but I also think it lends back to the NFL. We're developing more tight ends now through the college ranks because of people like Travis Kelce or some of the other tight ends we've seen, the elite 4 or 5 over the last, decade or so, that you see all these teams that are playing in the conference championship games and Super Bowls, and they all seem to have pretty good tight ends.
Well, and I thought Chris Ballard was spot on back in January when he said we have got to be better in the middle of the field offensively. I don't feel like the Colts found easy enough in the passing game. They just didn't find 5, 6, 7 yards easy enough. It's not going to lead off SportsCenter on any highlight reel.
Nah.
It's not going to be played on the Jumbotron at Lucas Oil Stadium to get you pumped up for kickoff, but it makes 2nd and 10 be 2nd and 4, or 3rd and 8 be 3rd and 2. And when you think about finding easy over the middle of the field, I think of tight ends and I think of running backs out of the backfield.
Yes.
And I know specifically, James, you and I are on the same page very much there. Of you need to draft a running back in the middle rounds of a pass-catching background. I think that specific skill set needs to be there. So, again, Ballard, I know had a lot of eye-roll comments for people back in January, and probably a lot of comments that, frankly, could just be met with, wait, it took you 8 years to figure that out. But one that I certainly agreed with was you need to be better over the middle of the field, and specifically, I think he means tight end and, again, a pass-catching running back.
Absolutely. I mean, he drafted that in Evan Hull a couple years ago. He got hurt, and so there's a void that they haven't been able to replace.
It's time to take another dart, in my opinion,
Absolutely.
on that day 3.
And I think it was very evident last year, like the last month of the season, JT played almost every snap like it was Pop Warner, and I'm like,
Right.
you know, you don't really trust Tyler Goodson, you don't really trust, you know, Trey Sermon, so you need
For
to go
good
ahead.
reason.
Yeah, and I understand that, but because of that, don't go into next season with that same void.
I was talking about the AFC South a moment ago, Kevin, and my question is, as you said, it's kind of a down division, right? Everybody is sitting there going, hey, we make a couple of moves, we're going to win this division this year. Are the Texans still that team, though?
Well, yeah, I think I want to make sure that I think the Texans do deserve credit. I mean, they have won a playoff game each of the last 2 years. First off, how many teams have done that? But secondly, they've done it with a rookie quarterback or a rookie contract quarterback. That's very impressive. New coaching staff, of course. But the AFC South just lacks any sort of depth. I mean, imagine being in the AFC North and that being your schedule on an annual basis.
Yeah.
Right now, imagine being in the AFC West. I mean, Jeff, look at those coaches. I know you come from an AFC West background. I mean, look at those 4 coaches in that division. Harbaugh, Andy Reid, Pete Carroll, Sean Payton. They've won some games, haven't they? And now look at the quarterbacks. Obviously, you have Kansas City, but then with what Herbert and I think Bo Nix, I think each of them certainly, you know, different ways, but they, you know, Herbert finally got to that level this year of at least experiencing what the playoffs are about, and then Bo Nix, I thought had a really nice rookie season. So it's just the depth of the other divisions. Like Houston is a fine team, and again, they obviously had their struggles this year, but it's more of the, when you look at your 6 divisional games, the other 3 divisions are just much more difficult than the AFC South.
Absolutely,
Should be.
but it continues to plague the Colts because what do the Texans have? They have a dude at quarterback, and sometimes he's a difference. You look at some of these games that they've lost to the Texans. I go back to that throw that C.J. Stroud made on the sideline. I believe it was last year.
You had to ice the game.
Exactly, to Nico Collins. And Jalen Jones was like right there, but it was a perfect throw, and that to me is sometimes a difference. And Chris Ballard's talked about it. When you have a dude, you walk onto any field and you feel like we can flip this thing. We have a chance. We have a shot. And they've kind of been behind the 8 ball from that quarterback perspective. And I think, obviously, when you have the injuries to Trevor Lawrence, that kind of takes him out of the race. And then the Titans are trying to figure out what they're going to do at quarterback as well. But even then, you're right there every year. So you got to flip some of those games into wins.
Have we given up on Trevor Lawrence?
I have not.
Yeah, I have not slammed the door shut.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I think there's a little bit of like you watch him play the Colts and you, wow, he's a lot better
amazing,
quarterback.
yeah.
Every Jacksonville player that plays the Colts in the last decade
right.
looks good.
Yeah, Cody Kessler beat the Colts. So, yeah, I've tried to like separate myself of like Kevin, don't just be in prisoner of the, hey, when they play the Colts, he's a great quarterback. But I don't think I'm not writing off Jacksonville and acting like they're a laughingstock, but still, it's
This
just
is his 3rd regime that he's going to have to.
right.
Yeah.
And again, I mean, Liam Cohen, I mean, by all accounts, I mean, certainly he handled that head coaching search like he is somebody. And, you know, how much has he helped Baker Mayfield? And obviously, you know, he comes from the McVay coaching tree. You know, there are a lot of NFL people that think really highly of him. So I'm not like there of like Jacksonville's just going to win 4 games next year and they're going to be a joke. But again, that doesn't change my overall AFC South thought. And that to me has got to be the most damning aspect of this now 10-year-long divisional title drought. It's I would argue it's the easiest division in football. It's certainly the easiest division in the AFC. And if you look at the quarterbacks that have won this division in that span, it's not Mahomes in the AFC West. It's not that at all. I mean, you had Brock Osweiler and Brian Hoyer winning the first 2 years of this division. You know, Bortles won it with Jacksonville. Obviously, Trevor Lawrence won it. C.J. Stroud's won the last 2. Ryan Tannehill won it a couple times. I mean, these are not household or great quarterbacks. I think that is what kind of adds the frustration for Colts fans.
Well, and then you look at the quarterback situation for not just the Colts, but also Tennessee. I think the Colts probably are a little bit ahead of the quarterback situation than Tennessee is because Will Levis was no answer last year. What are they going to do at this point in time?
What do they do at 1? I mean, that's fascinating to me.
Yeah, that's probably the biggest storyline because it's a domino effect. What they do at 1 affects everything else. You know, the Raiders need a quarterback. If everyone stays the same, picks the quarterbacks too soon, do they pick a wide receiver or something like that? So I think there's going to be, again, a lot of conversations this week that will determine the order of the draft, let alone who they pick.
I just worry that if the Colts are really looking at a tight end, to your point now, Daniel Jeremiah's got his 2 tight ends, 5th and 7th at this point in time. Could you imagine a scenario at all where the Colts get there at number 14 and those two guys are both gone?
That's hard for me to get around 2 months out of the draft. I mean, I just can't see two teams viewing tight end maybe in that light. And again, I don't.
But I'm starting to see them show up on everybody's big.
But I
board
don't think
in
the
top
tight
10.
end draft, to James's point earlier, I don't think the tight end draft stops there.
No.
Like, I think there are Elijah Arroyo from Miami's one that a lot of people like. Harold Fannin Jr. from Bowling Green is a name a lot of people like. The Colts had one of their assistants, and Chris Watt coached the tight ends, one of the tight end teams down at the Senior Bowl. Fannin Jr. was one who had huge games against Penn State and Texas A&M. So I don't think it's like, Loveland or Warren or bust. Obviously, the Colts, they tried a third-round pick in Jelani Woods. It's been a little injury-related. But, how the tight ends come off the board and how the Colts view it, I think will be a really interesting storyline this offseason.
Absolutely. I got one of my friends in the back, Charlotte Carroll from The Athletic, covers the Giants, making faces at me, so that's why I laughed. But I agree with you.
I don't envy her job covering the Giants.
No. I mean, we deal with a lot of things. And honestly, when you think about how bad it is with the Colts, I talk to other teams, the Jets reporters and the Giants, I'm like, maybe it isn't too bad here.
All right, coming up in a minute. Believe it or not, Kevin, we have a stat of the day.
So Scotty looked this up.
It's going to be our Jiffy Lube stat of the day, and we'll do that next on Sports Radio 93.5 and 107.5 The Fan.
It is starting to get very busy here at the NFL Combine. We would be technically at the Convention Center. All three shows today will be here, and we've got Chris Ballard and Shane Steichen meeting the media coming up later today. 4:30 for Ballard, 5:30 for Steichen. Again, we will have Ballard on this very show. That would be the Fan Morning Show with myself, Kevin Bowen, James Boyd, Jeff Rickard tomorrow morning around 8 o'clock.
All right, looking forward to that. In the meantime, we're doing things a little bit differently. We're going to freshen up the Jiffy Lube section every day here. We always have the Jiffy Lube trivia question, the pop quiz from Scotty J, which is tremendous. We're going to move the pop quiz to Fridays only, but we will have an amazing stat of the day spurred on by you today, Kevin Bowen. You asked Scotty J an impossible question about the Pacers game against the Denver Nuggets last night when they lost at home. And you got an answer, my friend.
Yeah, and you know what, Scotty? Could we get the last regular season game now that I look at this?
This isn't good enough now, right?
Could I put him to more work? I was curious the last time the Pacers had an opposing starting five, all five guys finish a game of 50% or better. Scotty looked it up not that long ago.
All right.
Game 2 of last year's Eastern Conference semifinals. Ooh. Against the Knicks, OG Anunoby 10-19, Josh Hart 8-12, Hartenstein was 5-7, DiVincenzo 10-20, and of course Jalen Brunson 11-18. The Pacers gave up 130. So last night, all five Denver starters, led by a career high and 19 assists for Nikola Jokic, all five were over 50%.
But who got the last laugh in that series last year, Kevin?
Indeed, it was the Pacers.
That's all I'm saying.
So Anunoby, did he go down in that game? Was that the game he got hurt?
I believe so.
Was it game 2?
Yeah, because he came back and had
that injury shifted. Oh, and then he got back there in game 7. He looked like me. It was painful watching him in game 7.
That's sort of like the Knicks' hex. They always have the injuries. Tom Thibodeau plays them a million minutes, and it's like, can you hold up when it matters the most?
I mean, they were up 20, I want to say, on the Pacers the other night. I guess this would have been a couple weeks ago now. And like 2 minutes ago in the game, and he's got Karl Anthony Towns like isolated. I'm like, dude, go put in, Obi Toppin's little brother to close out the game. What are we doing here?
It's old school, and honestly, it's a lack of evolution, I think, on his part. And it sort of plagues his team because if you think about it, his teams are always tough, but they kind of flame out at the end. And I think that, Rick Carlisle and other coaches are just a little bit maybe more cognizant of the miles they're putting on their players' bodies because you want to go into that thing fresh, man, because those games, you're playing heavier minutes anyways as the starter. I don't want to go too much down a rabbit hole, but, yeah, that's definitely an issue for Tom Thibodeau.
Well, I thought we kind of hit on this earlier. Again, Rick Carlisle was on with us at 8. You can check that out on the podcast. But, we mentioned, I think something that has separated Rick from a lot of coaches over 2 decades is his willingness to adapt and not be as stubborn. Like the 2003 blueprint to coaching NBA basketball is not the blueprint that's necessary in 2025.
No.
And
that was different in 2003 than it was in 1988, too.
Sure. And, different in 2013. I mean, the game's changed a lot just in the last 10 years. So I think Rick Carlisle has adapted very well to that.
Yeah.
Whereas some other coaches haven't fully adapted.
All right, that's your Jiffy Lube stat of the day, brought to you by Indiana's favorite oil change stop, Jiffy Lube, since 1985. Some news coming in this morning, too. We were talking to Kalen Kaler a little while ago about maybe some opting out of quarterbacks for medicals or throwing or whatever. Penn State defensive end outside linebacker Abdul Carter will not work out at the Combine this week because of a shoulder injury he suffered near the end of the Nittany Lions season.
Yeah, we saw that. Remember in the Fiesta Bowl, Boise State, Penn State. He played, by all accounts, clearly with a shoulder injury against Notre Dame, and he was a stud. I mean, he had one shoulder, and he made some of those Notre Dame offensive linemen look like they had no business
with 2 shoulders
being out there. Seriously. And that was a big topic. Entering that Penn State-Notre Dame game in the Orange Bowl was how healthy he is. So you talk about mock drafts, you talk about best player. It seems like Abdul Carter is that over Travis Hunter, over the quarterbacks. And, a team that I am interested to see, and again, they've got the Myles Garrett situation to play out. But can you imagine Myles Garrett and Abdul Carter opposite each other in Cleveland?
Well,
Cleveland has a number 2 pick.
I was going to say if Myles Garrett has anything to say about it, it will not happen.
Right. Yeah. It will not happen. But, that's a storyline to play out this week, certainly.
So what's interesting, of all the players we talk about, it kind of feels like he would be the odds-on favorite that, 3 years from now, we're going, that was the stud of the 25 draft, right?
Yeah, I think he plays a premium position. He's a hell of an athlete. He's kind of coming from that pipeline. I know Penn State's put out a couple of really good defensive ends, obviously the most recent one being Micah Parsons. And the funny thing about it is I'm pretty sure Abdul Carter's like a big Philadelphia Eagles fan. And, I want to say he might have been at the parade or something. And in my mind, I'm just like, do not let that guy go to Philly. Like, whatever happens. Like, I don't know what Philly has up their sleeves. Just don't let it happen. But, no, that dude can really, really play. And I think he's going to be somebody we're looking up in a few years and saying, back up the Brinkstruck and pay him.
Well, it's the year for defensive linemen because also this morning the Washington Commanders have granted defensive tackle Jonathan Allen permission to seek a trade.
I'm always curious what the
Myles
language
Garrett,
is like.
Jonathan Allen, you could draft Carter. There's a lot of ways you can go here.
So what? I mean, is that line of thinking like strictly financial? Because I mean, if you're the Commanders right now, aren't you in a position to win?
Probably.
I mean, does Jonathan Allen really view like I need to go somewhere else? You just got to the NFC title game with a rookie quarterback.
Some of the cap hit situation for Washington too. Maybe they've talked because he's got a cap hit of $22.3 million, and Washington would save $16.3 of that in cap space, whether he's traded or released. So maybe some of that is brought in play as well.
Got it. Some of it is that from Washington side of it.
Jonathan, would you be open to being traded rather than just being released? So
if you think about it, all the great teams do it. I mean, the Chiefs did it for a number of years where, like, they would just get rid of a really high-paid
look at
defensive back.
Tyreek Hill even.
Exactly, and then they'd retool with other things. And honestly, I think that's the sign of good front office is to be a bit proactive when it comes to those decisions.
Yeah. Defensive line, still a little bit up in the air for the Colts, too. I mean, what are they going to do with Kwity Paye? What are they going to do with some of these situations?
Yeah, Dayo Dengba's a free agent. I think that'll be a notable item. I'm probably a little bit more skeptical in the defensive line play than Chris Ballard is. He didn't seem to have really any issue with it at the end of the season. I think you've invested way too much in that group to be a below average, middle of the pack production defensive line, however you want to label it. They got torched on the ground to start the year when they returned everybody, and then I can't think of a meaningful sack or two they had when the game was on the line really the rest of the season. So that is a position group that, again, I think in my eyes, I'd probably view it differently than Ballard's eyes.
Yeah, I think it's a sneaky need because if you release Samson Ebukam, was coming off the Achilles tear. I think he turns 30 in May. I don't know if you want to pay a guy coming off an Achilles tear.
And you were saying they could save a pretty notable amount, right?
Yeah, I believe it's about $7 million in cap space versus $3 million in dead money. And then also, again, Dayo's a free agent. You already picked up Kwity Paye's fifth-year option for about $13 million. So you probably need another edge rusher in the draft or free agency to just at least give you some depth, assuming that you at least lose one of those two guys, if not two, in Sampson and Dayo.
And I think that's one of the items of, again, we'll see what the words are today. Louis Anarumo will be on with John coming up at 5 o'clock, but certainly the actions in the next month or two will play out. What defensively does Anarumo want differently? Mm-hmm. Like, I think there is some emphasis defensive back-wise. Will there be a heavy focus there? Because, oftentimes you see a new coordinator comes in, and they might want totally different personnel than the previous coordinator. I don't necessarily get that vibe from Anarumo, but, do we see any of that? I mean, they were a bad defense in Cincinnati, and they had the top sack dude in the NFL.
Yeah, they're just a weird
team. So, again, what didn't add up there?
There's a lot of things that didn't add up in Cincinnati last year.
But, again, mainly defense, right? I mean, Burrow was great, and the offense was great. So, what did not, add up there? And, again, how does he view this? Does he look at the Colts D-line and say, guys, I don't have a Hendrickson anywhere. Does that mean he feels he needs to blitz more? Okay. If you blitz more, what does that mean? That means you leave your corners on islands more. Well, does he trust the corner play here in Indy? Okay, if he doesn't trust the corner play, then should we start putting corner at 14 overall for the Colts? Will Johnson from Michigan? Is that a name we should start talking about more for the Colts? I think those little things. Again, we might not get that verbatim here from them, but those are some questions I have defensively.
Here's a question that I don't know the answer to. I don't know how widely sought Anarumo was going to be in this past offseason, but I'm guessing there was an element that he looked at what Indianapolis had and what their plans are and said, yeah, I can work with that. Right? There's got to be some of that going on.
Yeah, I don't think, and James, I think you were there at the Anarumo press conference, the opener. I think I was still doing the show. I got the vibe when watching it back, he does not think it's like a personnel overhaul needed for this defense?
No, I don't think it's that, but I do think, like we talked about earlier, is it one or two pieces that you really have to hit? Do we have to go out and get that safety? Do we need another coverage linebacker? Little pieces here and there, but I think he's bullish on this group because there is talent there, and maybe if you do some different things, and he, like I said, he's multifaceted, maybe you can pull the best or better things out of them.
All right, well, we are going to be here all day long, as you said, Kevin. We'll break away for ESPN Radio for a couple of hours here, and then Jake Query is going to be here from noon to 3, JMV from 3 to 6, and he'll talk to Lou Anarumo. If there was one question you were going to ask Lou today, what would it be, Kevin?
Yeah, it's probably that of like, okay, you had Trey Hendrickson. You don't have Trey Hendrickson here. Does that mean you're going to feel like you need to blitz more? And then again, does that mean all of a sudden your corners carry on a bigger emphasis because they're on an island? So again, I don't know if he'd answer that necessarily, but that would be something I would look into.
All right, Cam is awake now, 4 hours into his shift here, so we appreciate that. He's good to go. He did a great job setting up today, though. So
thank you, Cam.
Well,
yeah.
James Boyd, great to have you on board. Looking forward to talking to you every morning here on Sports Radio.
Yes, sir.
93.5 and 107.5 The Fan. And Kevin, thanks for putting up with the two of us for the first day today. We'll do it again tomorrow live from the Convention Center in downtown Indianapolis, again, side of the 2025 NFL Combine on 93.5 and 107.5 The Fan.